This meeting is being recorded.
Rick didn't want to violate the Brown Act. So. We're ready to go? All right, thank you. At this time, I will call to order the special meeting of June 22nd, 2021. Councilmember Perez, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Perez,
Here.
Councilmember Burns,
Here.
Vice Mayor Resendez,
Here.
Mayor Velasquez,
Here.
City Manager Miller,
Here.
Police Chief Reynoso.
Here.
The agenda for the City of Hollister City Council special meeting of June 22nd, 2021 was posted on the bulletin board on June 16, 2021 at 3:45 p.m. per Government Code Section 54956.
Thank you very much. We will now move to item A1.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. Good evening. Abraham Prado, Development Services Department Planning Manager and Interim Director. This evening is a really special meeting, not only because it's a special City Council meeting, it's a long time in the making in regards to recommending policy recommendations to the City Council. A little bit of background, February of 2020, the City Council adopted the a proposal, a contract with a firm by the name of PlaceWorks to assist the City of Hollister with the update of its general plan. We all know that the update of the general plan was a long time in the making, even before February of 2020, a few years actually in the making. And as we all know, we had the pandemic. Soon after, we had the stay-at-home order. And the City Council actually decided, though, that all of the different committees were to be canceled except for two, the Emergency Council and, very importantly, the General Plan Advisory Committee. And so some of the things that were adjusted, as we all know, the document requires a high level of public engagement. Some of the things that we did as a city to try to respond to that were, if, for example, we had a workshop that, prior to COVID that was planned to engage the public, we changed that to virtual workshops. Instead of having one, we had multiple, even three for each topic of discussion. And so little by little, we had gained that public engagement, which was great. One of the things that we were a little bit concerned is we wanted to make sure that we had all levels, all sectors of the population of the City of Hollister. And one of the concerns was reaching out to the Spanish-speaking population. And so we, with the help of PlaceWorks, the help of the Youth Alliance, and staff meeting with different organizations such as LULAC and the Youth Council as well. Staff provided presentations to them to try to get the word out to everybody. We actually had one particular workshop all in Spanish in May, and we had over 40 people in the count of attendance virtually, which was amazing. It was great. And so I do want to say that the 7 workshops, the 8 General Plan Advisory Committee meetings, and the Planning Commission meetings that we've had thus far are all in our website, hollister2040.org. it's all transparent. All the documentation is there, and even the videos. It was all recorded in YouTube, and they were all live. Thanks to our great IT director Paul De Silva, who has helped us all in every step of the way, and absolutely does deserve a big round of applause. We are forever grateful with him, and we are. And so, with that, and just want to say, all that information is available for any member of the public, for the council. It's all under hollister2040.org under the public engagement icon. And with that, we would like to present to you this evening Placeworks, and we have David Early and we have Carrie Stone, who will be providing a presentation regarding the policy recommendations this evening. With that being said, David?
Thank you very much for having me this evening. Again, I'm David Early with Placeworks, and I will be making a presentation this evening. I think you all and your staff have the ability to show that presentation for us, so I'll wait for that to come up. And while I'm waiting, let me just explain that we are here this evening to give you an overview of the work that's been done by the General Plan Advisory Committee, which Abraham just explained to you. We're going to be focusing in on two items this evening. One is the draft vision and values, and I will take that next slide. That's great. We're going to be, I'm going to give you a brief overview of some work we're actually doing on the zoning and a brief overview of the general plan update overall. And then we're going to be focusing on the two items that are the third and fourth items on this slide, the general plan vision and values, and the GPAC's recommendations regarding policies. So those last two items will take the majority of the evening, but I'm going to talk briefly about the other two items also. Next slide. I did want to just give you a brief update about a downtown entertainment district zoning code update, which we've begun work on at staff's request, and I believe your own request. With the lifting of the pandemic and a large number of businesses in the downtown wanting to have entertainment uses, but also with people now, in some cases living in the downtown area, staff has identified the potential for some conflicts between residential uses and late night uses, and a concern that residents in the downtown might try and restrict the entertainment uses because of noise or a perception of other nuisances. And I believe it's very important to the city that the downtown is able to function as an entertainment center. So for that reason, we're working on a draft update to the zoning code to reflect the idea that entertainment uses would be allowed by right in the downtown, and that they would not be stopped by a perception of one or two individuals that perhaps they're loud or in some way otherwise bothersome to them. Obviously, intensive nuisances would still not be allowed, but normal entertainment operations would be allowed by right. And we do plan to bring that to you, to your council in the fall of this year, so that you can consider it and get it on the books to support the downtown entertainment uses. I don't know, Abraham, if you want to add anything about that. That's really my whole update on this item, and I just wanted to let you know about it before we go on to the bulk of the meeting this evening.
No, that's perfect, David. Thank you for that. And that, yeah,
Okay.
that was a request that we've been talking with the city council in the past, and thank you for helping us in the preparation of that adoption, or that entertainment district to bring before the council for consideration and adoption in the fall.
Great. Mr. Mayor, I don't know if you want to invite council members to discuss that item at all. It really just is an update at this point, but I don't want to move on without hearing from the council, or at least the mayor, that you do want to continue.
Thank you. No, I think it is important that the other two council members that were not involved in the GPAC meetings understand or have participation in the conversation about an entertainment zone in our downtown area, because I think it is going to play a very important role to the future of the restaurants and other businesses in downtown. So if they have any questions, I'd like to hear what questions they may have, and then we can have a brief discussion about the concept of the entertainment zone. Mr. Perez, do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, so the entertainment use by right, so is basically what there's going to be some live music downtown, Is there gonna be certain hours, or what does that look like?
That's what we would work on. when
That's
we're drafting,
what's
yeah.
coming before us? The, is there any other topics that, I mean, what I feel, that, and I think, for the residents that are living downtown, is there specific parking for them? Because, I mean, I don't know of any, because it's like, parking's a problem down there.
Well, and this is a conversation we had in the past about parking in downtown, making sure that if units are built, that there's parking for them. I thought that was very important in the past. That's probably not part of this conversation about the
Okay.
entertainment zone, but the concept, again, as you're pointing out, is there would be live music or entertainment, activities going on in downtown to really encourage more activities or more of the public to visit downtown, especially on weekends, to come out and enjoy their community.
Okay, that's all I can think of right now.
Thank you.
I'm sure Tim's got a laundry list.
Mr. Burns, do you have a laundry list today? Should we get on
Come
the
on.
Excel spreadsheet?
Come on now, fellas.
We
Mayor,
gotta
thank you
harass
for the
somebody, come
opportunity. I have no questions at this time. Thanks, Mayor.
We're just teasing, you know we love hearing it, so
I
anytime
know you do,
If
and
somebody
I
does come to
simply
mind,
don't at
please.
this point.
Yeah, if something comes to mind, please bring it up. And again, I think in the future, the downtown entertainment zone is really what's going to encourage more restaurants to open in our downtown, which would lead to more of our own public staying here in our own community to enjoy dining and entertainment. So it's exciting. We're getting there. So there you go, Mr. Early. We're very few questions there.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much for that. And we will be continuing to work with your staff on this and try and make sure that it reflects some of the discussions that have already occurred. I'll go on then, if I could have the next slide. So I'm going to jump in now and talk about the general plan overall. I've got something on the order, I think, of 8 or 10 slides here. I'm going to then present that and then stop for any questions you may have. But this first part is not an action or direction item. It's really just to make sure that we all have the same background about the general plan. You may all be completely familiar with this and have no questions, and that'll be fine too. And then we'll go into the 2 reporting pieces where we do want to confirm our overall direction. So here, in terms of the general plan, what is a general plan? I think you probably do all know that the general plan is one of the only actually required planning documents for local jurisdictions in the state of California. And by state law, every city and every county has to have a general plan. And it's what the courts have called the blueprint for growth and development. They've also referred to it as the constitution for development in a given jurisdiction. It's the document that establishes a community vision and supporting goals, policies, and actions for growth and development and conservation. It provides consistent direction for future development. It's intended to balance growth, conservation, and quality of life. And it's also a document that documents baseline environmental conditions so that as development and preservation occur over time, there's an ability to track how things have changed as development occurs. Next slide. The general plan is required by law to have what are called elements. You can think of them as chapters. The state law calls them elements because it's not required that they be in individual chapters, but it's necessary that all of these pieces or topics are covered. The city's current general plan, which was updated in 2005, does have all the required elements. There are 7 required elements, which in your case exist in 6 chapters. There's a land use and community design element, land use being one of the requirements, a required circulation element, a housing element, a natural resources and conservation element. In the law, that one's referred to as the conservation element. There's an open space element, which in your case is called open space in agriculture. And there's one element that is called health and safety in your element, and that combines legally mandated elements about safety and another one about noise. So those 6 chapters make up the 7 elements that are required under state law. Your existing general plan does also have a community services and facilities element, which state law refers to as an optional element. You're allowed to add any element beyond those 7 required ones that you like. And in your case, you do have a community services and facilities element already. And we've been directed and heard from the community and heard from staff when we were hired that you wanted to add 3 new elements at this time. And those are an arts element, an economic development element, and just recently we were directed by the GPAC to also add an environmental justice element. This is a new requirement under state law, but it's only required in certain cities that meet certain thresholds. Hollister doesn't actually meet that legal threshold, but I think it's clear that environmental justice is critical to many people in Hollister, and for that reason, we've been asked to include an environmental justice element as well. So we're going to be adding those 3 new elements, as well as updating the existing 7 elements to create an updated general plan. I do want to say here before I go on that I believe that your existing general plan, which was prepared by another company, was a very good document. It's very comprehensive. It has a lot of great information in it. It does not require a thorough overhaul. It doesn't require us to throw it out and start over by any means. You've got a really good document in place, but we will be making both legally mandated changes as well as updating it to reflect existing conditions within the city. Next slide. We've identified a series of 7 goals for this general plan update process. First and foremost, as Abraham already mentioned, is to engage a broad spectrum of the community. That, of course, has been a challenge with COVID going on, but I think as Abraham has said that we've done a very good job of that. We've also had a goal to establish the community's vision for Hollister in 2040. You'll be hearing about that more tonight. And then within that vision, we've also heard that you want to maintain Hollister's small town agricultural character, that you want to manage growth consistent with the city's overall goals. You want to ensure high quality development, support economic development, and of course you also want to respond to state mandates and general plan guidelines, particularly those that have arisen since the adoption in 2005. Next slide. So the project actually has several components that go beyond just the general plan update, but which are all related to the general plan update. We're updating the general plan itself. We're also working with our traffic engineers and as well as city staff to implement a state law called Senate Bill 743. Many of you are probably familiar with it. It has required that all environmental review projects stop using level of service or other delay-based measurements when they go to measure traffic, and instead to look at vehicle miles traveled. And that's a very complicated technical issue, but we've got experts with Kinley Horn on board to work on that. Frederick Venter from Kinley Horn is here tonight. We're not going to be speaking about that tonight, but that SB 743 implementation for vehicle miles traveled measurement is a very important part of the process as well. We're also preparing a climate action plan, which will address climate change and reductions in greenhouse gases and how the city will respond to issues of climate and resiliency. We're preparing a hazard mitigation plan to look at issues like flooding and earthquakes and wildfires. And we will be preparing an environmental impact report as mandated by state law that covers all of those items: the general plan update, the SB 743 implementation, the climate action plan, and the hazard mitigation plan. All of those will be covered in a single EIR. And then we will also be preparing what's called a municipal service review, which is a document required by the local agency formation commission, or LAFCO, and the LAFCO uses that to consider future annexations to the city. So once we have a sense of what annexations the city wants to make, we'll be doing a municipal service review to cover those annexations so that LAFCO can act on them in the future. So it's a very comprehensive package that begins with the general plan update and has all these other pieces as well. Next slide. I wanted to mention also that we are looking at what we call a planning area, which is somewhat larger than the city itself. I know that some of the lines on this map are a little bit hard to read, but I'm sure you can recognize the outline of the city of Hollister itself and the city limit, which is the smallest area in here, which has the black line around it. You're, I'm sure, very familiar with the fact that the city limits a little larger than that are the sphere of influence, which is considered by the LAFCO to be the city's current maximum area of annexation. But larger than that, we have the city's urban service area, which is an area that was agreed upon through a memorandum of understanding with the San Benito Water District, San Benito County, and the Sunny Slope District. So that's an area that the city has in the past considered providing urban services, even though it's larger than the sphere. And then even larger than that, we have what we call the planning area, which is the purple dashed line that you see surrounding the largest area here. That's an area that's called out in state law as one that the city should establish. And it's the area where the city's, in the city's own judgment, that planning projects that occur in that area might have an effect on the city. So that's not an area that the city would annex. It's sort of by definition wants to be larger than that. It's a statement that if projects even were to occur under county auspices in this area, that the city recognizes them as having a potential effect on the city and therefore might comment on them or might be concerned about thinking about planning in this area, even though the city may never develop in it itself. So that's that purple area, and that's our larger planning area for this general plan update. Next slide. Abraham already mentioned that we've had quite a number of opportunities for public involvement in this process. We're a little over half done now, and there have been a lot of meetings and workshops. We had scheduled a total of 8 workshops and other events. We've held most of those now remotely, but we will be holding a few more in person. We've had robust online activities through our website. We have already held a series of 8 GPAC meetings, and we'll be holding several more. We have meetings with the Planning Commission scheduled and meetings with you yourselves. And so all of those are on the docket to make sure that this is a very widely reviewed public involvement process. Next slide. We do also have a very robust website that I think all of you are familiar with. It is at hollister2040.org. I'm sure you've been there and seen all the information there, and you can be checking it regularly to get input, to get updates about the process. As Abraham already mentioned, it has all of the background documents on it. It has records of all of the meetings. It has videos of the meetings, particularly as they've occurred on Zoom. And it has all the background reports and documents as well. So it's got a great bunch of information. If I could have the next slide. And I did want to mention before I go on that the website has also had a series of online surveys and engagement tools that we've gotten a lot of great feedback through as well. So here's our schedule and process. We are now at the point of being very close to completing the top 3 of these items. Tonight's meeting represents the end of these 3 items, in which we've documented baseline conditions and future trends, drafted a vision, and gone through a series of policy assessments and design alternatives. We plan to have you review those this evening, and really our goal this evening is to make sure that all 4 of you believe that we are on the right track. Obviously, we've already had a lot of input from 2 council members through the GPAC, but we want to make sure that all 4 of you, with public input, believe that we're headed in the right direction. This, however, I want to be very clear, is not by any means the end of the process. We are going to be drafting the general plan itself, as well as the other work products I mentioned, as well as the environmental impact report. And we anticipate that all 3 of those, all those documents will be available in fall of 2021, so for public review. The public review process will then begin in the fall and will actually last about 9 months, all the way into next summer. And we anticipate adoption of the general plan and the other documents after extensive public review sometime next summer of 2022. So you can tell from the schedule that on the one hand, tonight is a very important meeting because we are confirming our overall direction, but it is also very important to understand that all of you, the public, the Planning Commission, the GPAC, and you as the City Council will have additional opportunities to review everything before it is adopted. Next slide. I did want to mention just briefly the GPAC. I'm sure you're all very familiar with it, but that committee does have 7 members with 2 main functions, both of equal importance. One, to review and make recommendations to the Planning Commission and Council on the work products that form the content of the general plan update. We've had great input from your 2 council members, from the 2 planning commissioners, and now the 3 members of the public who are on the GPAC, and they really have given us great guidance on those work products. They are also simultaneously serving as project ambassadors about the general plan update to spread the word about it, encourage participation, and build community support for the general plan update. And I want to thank them very much for that role as ambassadors as well. Next slide. This just is a summary of the 7 GPAC members. The mayor and council member Resendez are on the GPAC, as well as Commissioners Huboy and Stevens, and 3 members of the public, Chris Evans, Carol Johnson, and Larry Rebecki. Next slide. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation, part 1. I do want to stop here and just ask if there's any information or questions that council members have. And from here, I am going to go forward and talk about first the draft vision statement, and then get your guidance on that. And then we'll go into the even bigger bulk of the work on the policy issues. Any questions or comments from council members at this time?
Thank you. Any questions from council members? Doesn't appear to be any questions, Mr. Early, so go ahead and move forward.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. So this next item, this is a guidance item. I will be explaining the vision statement, and then we will be asking, Mr. Mayor, you may want to ask for public input at that time on the vision statement, and then we'll turn it over to the council for any guidance in terms of if there are any revisions to it, or if you feel like the vision statement is okay as drafted. And again, it's not a formal adoption of the vision. That would occur through the general plan, up through the actual adoption of the general plan, but we do want to get your guidance this evening. So what is the vision statement? Well, it's a statement that's intended to describe the future of Hollister as you and the community as a whole would like Hollister to be in 2040. And I mentioned already that your current general plan is really a great document. It has pretty much everything a general plan should have. But one thing that it doesn't have, and it's not required by law, but it's something that I, at least as a general plan practitioner, feel is really important to have. It doesn't have a single statement about what Hollister is hoping that it will be under that general plan. One can sort of feel it out from reading the contents of the general plan. But the general plan, of course, is a very lengthy document with a lot of policies in it. And it can be hard, I think, for lay people in particular to look at the general plan in its, an inch thick document and really understand exactly what the city is hoping for. So what we're trying to do here is to create a 1 to 2 page statement that sets the overall tone of what the city is trying to be through this entire general plan. So this vision statement expresses shared community values. It relates to all the topics that are covered in the general plan, and it guides the preparation of the general plan goals and policies. And you can see in this diagram that in that sense, the vision statement sits at the very top. The goals flow from that vision statement, and then individual policies and actions flow from the goals. So I'll give an example of that in the next slide. So here's an example that the vision statement, and in fact, it does have a statement very much like this. It could have a statement in it that says something like residents can both live and work in Hollister. So that would be a sentence within the vision statement. Within that, then from that might be a goal articulated in the general plan, which is the desired outcome of increasing local jobs. So that would be articulated as a goal in the goals section of the general plan. And then you might have both policies and actions to support that goal. A policy, for example, might be to designate new land use designations for commercial uses at the airport. An action might be to direct staff to develop a program to attract new businesses to the industrial park. So those policies and actions come from the goal, and all of the goals spring from the vision statement. So that gives you a sense of how these things fit together. Next slide. So to put together the vision statement, we did that over the course of the middle of 2020. We held a series of workshops in late June and early July of last year, all online due to the pandemic. We also had online engagement tools that were available for most of the months of June and July. Then we drafted the draft vision statement. We brought it to the GPAC on October 6th. Then we did all the work on the policies through the fall and the spring of this year. Did that through the GPAC, and we brought both those documents, including the vision statement, to the Planning Commission on May 24th. And the Planning Commission then made a few changes and passed it on as well. So that's the process that we've had to develop this vision statement. Next slide. And the vision statement consists of two main parts. First, we have a series of values, and there are 4 of those that through our work with the community, it became very clear that community members really value these 4 principles overall in planning for the city of Hollister. The first of those is equity, ensuring that everyone is treated fairly and that there's equal access to city services and infrastructure. Number 2 is diversity, that people in Hollister really respect the diverse cultural, religious, and political backgrounds within the city and welcome and support people of all ages, incomes, and abilities. Number 3 is a value of innovation, thinking boldly, fostering new ideas, and generating opportunity. And 4th is the concept of sustainability, understanding that all of our actions contribute to social, economic, and environmental sustainability, and we want to plan accordingly to reflect that value of sustainability. So those are the 4 values that would be included in this vision statement, assuming it's adopted with the general plan. And then if we can have the next slide, we have the actual written vision statement as well. And this is it, it's in entirety. I'm not going to read it, but you can see from here that it's actually relatively brief. It's not a 100-page, 200-page general plan. Fits on just over 1 page of a written document. And it expresses the idea that Hollister wants to be a place where people can live, work, and play. It's a place with a strong sense of community, with a wonderful natural setting framed by the mountains and an agricultural landscape, with new development complementing the historic character and small town charm that Hollister already has. It goes on to say that Hollister wants to be known as an innovation hub, attracting businesses to the downtown, the industrial part, and the airport, and providing lots of opportunities for high quality jobs, meaning that in the future residents can work locally without needing to spend a great amount of time on commuting. The vision goes on to talk about transportation, not only by car, but also by bus, bicycle, and on foot, that neighborhoods, schools, shops, jobs, healthcare, and other services are all accessible by bikeways, walkways, bus, and rail lines. Then it talks about community life, and particularly the downtown, public spaces, and self-expression, connection, and well-being. It talks about public art, and it talks about focusing new development in urban areas and adjacent to existing development, enhancing connectedness, retaining the agricultural areas around the city, and working with the county and other local agencies to ensure that growth is well-planned, sustainable, and provided with needed services and resources. So those are the main concepts within the vision. And as I mentioned, all those concepts will then spring from this vision document to become goals and then to become policies and actions within the general plan. Next slide, yes. So that's the last slide. Maybe we can go back one just to leave this up on the screen, and I'll turn it back over to the mayor and council. What we're looking for here this evening is to confirm that we're headed here in the right direction with these 4 values and this vision statement, to see if you want to make any changes to it at this time, or if you want to direct us to continue to move forward with this vision as it's articulated here.
Thank you. Is there any comments from council members? No comments. Mr. Early, you said at this point we would ask for public input also?
Yes.
Okay, if there's no.
And just, I think if you do that, you should be clear that it would be limited to this vision, values and vision as themselves. Well, I would suggest a separate comment period after I make my presentation on the policy framework.
For the other parts, so we're just, at
Right.
this point, we'd be opening for the vision statement.
Right.
Correct, okay. As I don't hear any questions or comments from council members. Go ahead, sir.
So in their the traveling sentence in their paragraph, rail lines is, so I know that the, what's our vision for our rail lines?
The rail line?
Yeah.
We did a study recently through COG to identify the viability of a rail line, and that came back saying it would cost us about $100 million to do that rail line community, and there's a lot of interest from the community to use that line, but still not enough to fully support it financially. But that at this point, this is a starting point where we can move forward, seeking grants to start planning for the rail line and getting the rail line built. So that's going to be a part of Highway 25 widening and rail, giving our residents an opportunity to use either the newer highway or rail. That's looking at about a 10-year
And hopefully
plan.
eventually hooking up to the speed rail.
The bullet train?
Bullet train.
No, the bullet train is
That's gonna be over there.
this is why the rail line is important, because that will connect us to Gilroy. The bullet train will stop in Gilroy.
Right, exactly.
And will allow commuters to use that to San Jose or San Francisco.
Thank you.
Okay, all right.
I don't see anyone with their hand raised in Zoom, so there's no comments at this point.
Mr. Early, there is no comments from the public? So
All right.
you can continue.
It would be appropriate to both hear any additional council comments and then take a straw vote. It's a non-binding vote, but just let us know that the 4 council members have looked at this and whether there are any changes desired at this time.
Okay, so this time we'll ask for a vote from the council members. We'll do a roll call. It's non-binding, as Mr. Early pointed out, but we can do, well, let me do a little more informal. Mr. Resendez?
I think it looks good. We had a lot of public input, and I appreciate all the time and hours that were spent. I think it's very reflective of what the community needs and has been asking for, so I definitely support it. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Perez?
I totally support it. It does reflect what the community, what we're looking to accomplish, and it's totally supported.
Thank you. Mr. Burns?
Thank you, Mayor. I, as well, support it 100%. I was curious, however, I don't see, and I've read it at least 2 or 3 times, and it may be in there and I may just be missing it, but I don't see where there's a discussion about a safe community and a commitment to our community's safety, whether it be while traveling or while enjoying the amenities or their home life.
That's a great comment. I think it's true, council member, that it's not in there. As I already mentioned, there is a required safety element. We're also doing a hazard mitigation plan, and so we certainly are covering safety. But I think it's an excellent observation, and with the council's direction, we can add that and bring it back to you when we bring back the entire general plan. We'll make sure that we've added probably just a sentence that does talk about safety as well.
Thank you. I'll defer to my colleagues in that regard, but I certainly would support that. Thank you, sir.
I would say that's a very good catch, Mr. Burns. So, yeah, I would support that. Are the rest of you okay with that?
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Early, so it looks like we have 4
Right.
council members in agreement.
Great. Okay. So I think that's all we need. We don't need a formal vote. I think we've heard, just to summarize, that all 4 council members think this is headed in the right direction, and all 4 also agree that we should add a sentence to reflect the desire for a safe community as well. All right. With that said, I will go on to the bulk of the meeting, which is to talk about the policy items. And so we can take the next slide and even the slide after that. We'll be doing the same thing now. There's more data here to cover, but I'm going to go over the work of the GPAC and the public in regard to policy issues. And then I'm going to ask again for any guidance you all may have. And I would suggest before you give that guidance that you also ask for public comment as well. I will mention already here too that there are several letters that have been received on these items. I think they've all been pointed out to you already and placed in your packet, but if you have any questions or you want to make sure you have all of them, we can do that also, but I did want to mention that they are available to you. So to put together these policy options, we held a series of community workshops, again virtually, in both March and May, 2 in English in March and a 3rd one in Spanish that was very well attended to talk about policy issues in the general plan. We also had an online survey about policy issues, and we had a total of 5 GPAC meetings in late March and all the way through April to go over in great detail all of the items that you'll be seeing this evening. So I want to assure you, although you're only having this one meeting this evening, the GPAC has vetted all of these items in great detail, and they've already been brought forward to the Planning Commission at a study session, which, as I already mentioned, was held on May 24th. Next slide. We covered a total of 24 different policy topics. You see them all listed here. I won't read them all individually, but you can see it's a very broad list of things. And this is a list that was developed through previous work with the community and with the GPAC, where really anything that community members and GPAC members felt was important to talk about, we did go ahead and talk about all those things. You'll notice on here, one item, number 12, is crossed out. That was cannabis. And the reason it's crossed out is that once it was considered in detail by the GPAC decided that although economic development is very important and is covered, as you can see in items 6 through 11, that there was not a need for specific policies regarding cannabis. And so in the documents before you this evening, you don't have specific cannabis policies, although you do have very robust economic development policies. In addition to that, you'll notice 8 items on this list that are in orange. And those are the ones that received by far the most attention from the public, from the GPAC, and from the Planning Commission. And those are the ones we'll be focusing on this evening. The other 15 items, numbered 1 all the way through 24, are ones that were very closely considered by the GPAC and by the public, We had some very robust discussions about them, but in the end, I believe at least, and I think staff concurs, that the work that's been done is quite sound and doesn't necessarily need your review this evening. But after you look at the first 8 items that we're recommending for your consideration, you are certainly welcome to open up any of those other items, and we're happy to talk about them. I have slides to go over them. I won't be showing the slides tonight other than about these first 8 items that you see in orange, but any other items that you would like to ask about, we're happy to talk about as well. So we have the full range here for your discussion. But tonight, I'm going to be talking about new school funding, farmland mitigation, sensitive habitats, level of service, growth management, special planning areas, residential land use designations, and inclusionary zoning. And when we're open to any other discussion you might want to have on the other 15 items. Next slide. So let me start by talking about new school funding. And I really should mention that through conversations with the GPAC, the Planning Commission, and staff, we've realized that this is not only an issue about new school funding, but really does apply to all sorts of public facilities, and that it's very important to the city to make sure that as new development occurs, that there's adequate funding for all types of facilities. Schools are a special case in that school impact fees are limited by law and in terms of what an individual jurisdiction can collect. And it's pretty much agreed that the amount that developments pay are insufficient to construct new school facilities. For example, and these are ballpark numbers, the fees generated by a full high school worth of students living in houses might generate maybe $10 million. A new high school might cost anywhere from $40 to $60 million to construct. So there's quite a shortfall that comes from those school fees that are limited by state law. So therefore, additional school funding needs to be generated through some sort of incentive or bond measure. So we have worked on this particular item quite a bit. We've discussed it with the school district. We've heard in significant comment from other interested parties as well. And we have put together some language for your consideration. If we can have the next slide. The GPAC did consider the two options, and the Planning Commission passed those on, and we've made some changes to the second one as well. So first is to grant additional density, flexible setbacks, building heights, and or reduced parking requirements for any projects that voluntarily provide additional school funding beyond what's required by law. And the second is that as a precondition for any annexation or redesignation of new land uses, which are discretionary actions which do not have to occur, but which the city can do if it so chooses, that the city would only do those if there's a specific financing plan, development agreement, or other similar document that ensures that there's adequate funding to support the construction of all public school facilities, including water, sewer, storm drainage, roads, sidewalks, parks, and public schools. It's very important to note that this does not require developers to pay a fee. This just says that the development community working with the city in suggesting an annexation or redesignation of land needs to ensure that there is adequate funding available for all needed facilities. And then it's up then to the proponents of that annexation or new land use to voluntarily figure out exactly how that should occur. So that's the first set of recommendations, the first of 8, and I'll go on from here. Next. The next item is farmland mitigation. An agricultural mitigation strategy is required under the California Environmental Quality Act. The city does already often require agricultural mitigation for development through its EIRs, but there's not a requirement within the general plan to do that today. Typically, other cities have mitigation requirements at a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 ratio. What we mean by that is that if 1 acre of agricultural land is developed, then either 1 or 2 acres of other agricultural land are set aside through easements or other contractual arrangements to ensure that they continue to work as agricultural land in the future. We did also do quite a bit of research on what would constitute a viable agricultural site. We heard from the Agricultural Land Trust as well as users that we need to make sure that agricultural sites are at least 20 acres minimum, that they have access to water, soils with capacity to retain moisture. It's important to have buffers around farming and residential uses, and to ensure that any surrounding land uses are rural or rural residential, and that they understand that agricultural uses will be nearby. Next slide. With that in mind, the GPAC passed on 3 recommendations, and based on that discussion we had about farmland mitigation, we also developed a 4th item that's before you this evening. First is to require a 2-to-1 ratio of agricultural land preservation for each acre of farmland being converted, to establish the city as the agricultural mitigation enforcement agency, and assigning management responsibilities to a conservation organization who would manage the easements or development rights that are collected under this arrangement. Number 3 is to require agricultural mitigation for all lands classified as prime, unique, or farmland of statewide importance. And then 4th, the new one is to also develop a policy regarding agricultural buffers in areas that are projected to become the interface between urban and agricultural uses, so that there are buffering uses between ag and urban uses surrounding the city. So these are the 4 recommendations regarding farmland mitigation. Next slide for the 3rd item, which are sensitive habitats. In this map, you can see particularly the hatched area on the east side of the city, which includes critical habitat for the California red-legged frog and the California tiger salamander. There are federal, state, and local regulations that protect this sensitive habitat, but it's also an area with future residential development planned, particularly by the county, but conceivably at some point in the future by the city as well. Next slide. With that in mind, we've heard quite a bit from the public, from the GPAC, and from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service about the designated area that is critical habitat for those species. And with input from the Fish and Wildlife Service, we've developed 2 policies. The first to require a qualified biologist to evaluate the potential for protected biological resources on proposed project sites, and then to avoid development in areas with high quality habitat, which is defined as areas with known species occupants, the presence of breeding habitat, a large area of suitable habitat, and the absence of nearby development. So those would be the requirements to make sure that we do preserve those habitats that truly are sensitive and critical to those 2 species, the tiger salamander and the red-legged frog. Next slide. The 4th item is level of service. And I mentioned already that state law now precludes you from using level of service as a metric in your environmental impact reports, but level of service as a measure of congestion remains very important to members of the public throughout the community. People want to know that they will be able to drive around the community and drive in and out of the community and not run into significant delays to the extent possible. The current general plan uses what's called level of service C as the established desired level of service at all signalized and unsignalized intersections within the city. And we do want to encourage that a level of service standard be maintained. However, it's important to understand that while 29 of 37 intersections that we've studied do operate at that adopted standard, there are actually 8 in the city that have already fallen below the standard, and that it may not really be possible to maintain that standard in some areas. It's particularly complicated and difficult to maintain a high level of service such as C in an area like the downtown, where you actually want lots of people to be in the area. And because there's lots of people in the area, they're there with their cars, and there may be a little congestion. And it's actually almost a good thing to have congestion in a place like a downtown, because you want people being there. You want people coming in, finding a place to park, walking around and enjoying the downtown. Similarly, you might have a lower level of service in a very developed industrial or job generating area because of the large number of employees and the large number of truck trips coming into the area. And so it may be difficult to maintain that level of service C in an industrial area as well. So with that in mind, if we can go on to the next slide, the GPAC did make a recommendation regarding this and suggested that there be that you try and maintain level of service C in most parts of the city, with the exception that you would allow a level of service D at 4 downtown intersections, those being 4th and Monterey, San Benito and Sally Street, and also San Benito at South Street. And then there would be no level of service standard at any other intersections, since those are often stop sign controlled and could have a fair amount of congestion as people come in and out of the area. So that's one recommendation, is to keep the level of service standard, except not in the downtown area. And then if we could have the next slide, the GPAC and Planning Commission did also recommend that the industrial area have a level of service of D as well. And that's the area that's outlined in red on the map that you see before you. So a couple of recommendations regarding level of service, maintaining C in most parts of the city, but going to D in the downtown at 4 study intersections, and also within the industrial area. Next slide. The next item is growth management, and particularly looking at how services are provided within the city, and also looking at the amount of development to be allowed at the periphery of the city. We did a pretty exhaustive analysis to understand the amount of development that may be wanting to occur through 2040, and the amount of capacity that the existing sphere of influence has within it. And what we found is that, in fact, most of your sphere of influence has already been spoken for in terms of development projects, with the exception of a pretty large amount of area that's designated for high density residential and mixed uses. Your development community has had a history of being quite successful at developing single family homes and lower density townhomes or zero lot line homes, but there hasn't been much market and not much development of the higher density products, apartments, townhouses, or mixtures of uses. So depending on the type and intensity development over the next 20 years, the existing SOI and city limits may or may not have sufficient capacity. We looked at 3 different development scenarios. One of those is what we call a baseline scenario, which comes from the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments, or AMBAG. They project about 2,000 units through the year 2040. And if you assume that development would occur in those high density and mixed use areas, you do have capacity to accommodate those 2,000 units. Now, those would not be single family homes. They would be primarily higher density units, but you could accommodate them. If, however, you go to a moderate development scenario, or even a more robust development scenario, and these reflect the pace of development over recent years, you may need additional acreage, depending on the development intensity. A moderate scenario of about 4,800 units might need up to 220 acres to accommodate it. And this robust development scenario, which just tracks is the same rate of development as just in the last few years, when growth has of course been quite robust, comes out at about 6,800 units, and you would need as many as 636 additional acres of land, depending on the intensity of the development that might occur. Next slide. There are also issues that we need to talk about in regard to managing growth at the periphery of the city when it comes to wastewater treatment. The city has historically extended wastewater service to areas outside of the city limits that are being developed by the county. We had extensive discussions about that with the county and with the Local Agency Formation Commission, and realized that Government Code Section 56133, as referenced here, actually stipulates that there are limitations on the extension of sewer service out to areas beyond the city limits. Service is primarily only to be provided in the SOI, the sphere of influence, and only then where annexation is expected. If the city does not expect to annex the property, it's not appropriate or legal to extend sewer service to it. And outside of the SOI, it's only allowed to extend sewer service if there's an immediate or pending health and safety threat. So the mere desire for the county or a developer to develop those lands outside the SOI does not create or does not constitute an immediate or pending health or safety threat. And so the city really should not be extending sewer service into those areas. There are existing agreements among the city, the county water district, and the Sunny Slope district that suggest that the city would provide sewer service in those areas, and those could be a violation of state law. So with all that background, let me just talk about what the GPAC and ultimately the Planning Commission moved forward. If We can have the next slide. The GPAC did recommend very modest changes to the sphere of influence, and this is particularly an addition in the southern area near Union Road. It's an addition of about 190 acres, and that's enough to accommodate, and then some moderate addition on the north side as well. It's enough to accommodate that the moderate growth scenario or projection, and to do so particularly with a strong reliance on multifamily mixed use projects. The GPAC also recommended, and the Planning Commission agreed, that there should be general plan policy that requires that wastewater service and other services only be extended to lands within city limits or areas of the sphere that are anticipated to be annexed by the city, consistent with Government Code 56133B, and also to not renew the existing MOU with the county, the two districts, once that MOU expires, which does happen in the summer of this year because of concerns about its legal validity. So those are the three recommendations in this regard from the GPAC. Next slide. We did also look with the GPAC at a series of 3 special planning areas that were brought to us by staff with input from the Planning Commission and City Council. They're shown here in the brightest colors on the map, the blue area being the Buena Vista corridor on the north side of town along Buena Vista Road, the green area on the right being the Meridian Road extension area, and the Union Road corridor being the purple area on the south side of town. The GPAC, with input from the public, looked at a number of land use and circulation changes in these areas, and we have specific proposals for each of them. If we can have the next slide. We'll look first at the Buena Vista area, which does also include a sort of expanded Buena Vista area that goes up along Highway 25 and the railroad. And you can see proposed land use designations in this area. Those include keeping most of that area in agriculture. And you can see that shown on this map with the green color, and having a much more limited amount of medium and higher density residential uses right along Buena Vista Road, with additional commercial and mixed use uses and residential uses along Highway 25 going north out of town. And then also an extension of Buena Vista Road itself, extending Buena Vista Road all the way out to Highway 156. And you see that with a little call out and a gray line in the lower left-hand corner of the map. So those are the projected, suggested recommendations for land use designations in that Buena Vista corridor area. Next slide. In the Meridian Road area, the GPAC recommended actually trying to maintain that area largely with its current character, which means redesignating some lands that are currently designated for suburban development or urbanization, and changing those back to what's called residential rural in your general plan, so that those can maintain the relatively large lot sizes that exist there today. At the same time, Meridian Street would be extended to go all the way out to Fairview. Prater Street would be extended north-south to go from Santa Ana down to Hillcrest. These would be only intended to provide additional local circulation, and there would be some sort of traffic calming measure at the intersection of Prater and Meridian, so that cars would not be encouraged by any means to speed through that area. It would simply be for the convenience of the local residents, and the area itself would be maintained with its current lot sizes and overall development character. Next slide. And then the last of these 3 areas is the Union Road area, and you see the GPAC's recommendation here. That does include requiring the creation of a specific plan for the entire development portion of this area, establishing a policy to preserve some of the visual elements of existing orchards in the area, but to look for development north of Union Road and east of Southside Road. The area south of Union and west of Southside would be maintained for agriculture, as you see here in green. There would be higher density residential built on either side of the existing school on the north side of Union Road. And then there would be a mixed use and higher density residential development between Southside and Airline Highway or Highway 25. And that could really become a new focus area for development at the south side of Hollister with pretty significant mixed use and higher density residential development. So those are 3 recommendations for those 3 special study areas. And I'll go on now to our last several items. The next one, if we could have the next slide, is high density residential development. Your existing general plan has a single high density residential designation that actually spans quite a breadth from 12 to 35 dwelling units per acre. And what's been happening within that designation is that developers have been generally developing at the very low end of that scale, which does not necessarily create apartments or townhouses and doesn't always fit the letter of the law from the state in terms of accommodating your need for more affordable housing. The state designates that 20 dwelling units per acre is a minimum to meet what's considered the default density for affordable units. And we are recommending that you have at least 65 acres with a minimum designation of 20 dwelling units per acre to make sure that you do cover that state mandate. So what we're suggesting is that at least 65 acres be designated with the new general plan designation that will go from 20 to 35 dwelling units per acre, with 12 to 20 units per acre allowed on the remaining high density residential sites within the city. So if we take, there are some other issues as well. Let's go on to the next slide. This map shows the areas that the GPAC recommended and the Planning Commission concurred should have that higher designation starting at 20 dwelling units per acre. You can see them in the dark red on this map, and you can see that they are dispersed throughout the city, which was very important to the GPAC to make sure that those new housing sites are not all in just one neighborhood, but they actually are throughout various locations of the city. The GPAC additionally recommended that the maximum density in the high density designation go from 45 up to 65 dwelling units per acre, and that in the downtown, that you allow up to 125 dwelling units per acre at the high end of the range. Next slide. The last item I'm going to be discussing tonight, the last of sort of the big 8, if you will, that we thought do require your attention tonight, is about inclusionary housing. Inclusionary housing policy is one that requires a percentage of any new market rate housing projects to be reserved for lower or moderate income households. This increases housing affordability, it reduces housing segregation, and it supports state mandated housing targets. It can, of course, impact project feasibility because the cost for those subsidized units generally is spread to the other units within a development project. Programs that affect rental projects and or that require greater than a 15% set aside can be subject to state review and approval. Your municipal code already requires inclusionary housing for conversions of multifamily rental units, but it does not have, you do not currently have an inclusionary program for any new construction. So we talked about that extensively with the GPAC. This was reviewed by the Planning Commission. If we could have the next slide. The GPAC recommended that there be we do create an inclusionary requirement that would require 20% of units in any given project to be affordable for moderate, low, and very low incomes. We do want to note here that this means that the state would review that program because state law says that the state reviews any program over 15%, particularly if it applies to rental housing. For that reason, you would need to do a feasibility study as well and ensure that you do find that it's economically feasible to require that level of additional inclusionary units. The GPAC went on to say that it did not want to allow alternative compliance. That would apply to for sale projects only. State law does require an in lieu option for rental housing inclusionary programs. And this would be, in addition, the GPAC asked that all single family subdivisions of 40 units or greater need to include at least 10% of their units as multifamily buildings in 4 units or more. A smaller subdivision that's single family might have just 1 or 2 houses set aside to meet this inclusionary requirement, but they wouldn't necessarily need to be in a multifamily building. Any project over 40 units would be required to have at least 10% of its units as multifamily projects within the subdivision. Next slide. So that concludes my presentation. As I said at the beginning, I've gone through the 8 items here that are in orange on this slide. I am available to present and answer questions about any of the other items that are on this list. And what I would suggest right now is, Mr. Mayor, that we take any clarifying questions from the council members, then open it up for public comment, and then come back and see if council members have comments. You might want to go through these 8 items one by one, or if there are not too many comments, you might just talk about them all as a whole. But by the end of this evening, we do want to get your guidance, just like you gave us on the vision, get your guidance that we are working in the right direction, and we should go ahead and incorporate all the policy direction that I just went over into the general plan itself, which we will then bring back to you for your final consideration. So again, this is a non-binding direction tonight, but it does set us on the path to prepare the general plan with this guidance. So with that, I'll turn it back to you for comments, and then questions and comments, public comment, and then your direction.
Thank you, sir. So your recommendation was first with the council and then public comment?
Any questions from council, not discussion or comment from council, but any questions and then public comment.
Okay. So we'll start with council. Any questions you have on the items listed? Councilmember Burns?
Thank you, Mayor. Sir, in regards to the conversation about buffer zones, and this may be getting too deep in, and I appreciate that if that's the case, but when they're talking about the buffer zones, was there a conversation about school locations? And my concern is specific in relation to agricultural lands, specifically to address potential aerial sprayings. I know that sometimes is a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, and the very short answer is no, we did not discuss that. And I'll tell you the major reason being that the city has very little oversight over exactly where schools are located. Generally speaking, school districts acquire property either through a purchase or often through a donation of land, or land sold at a very strong discount. A developer might dedicate such land in order to make sure that there are adequate schools near or within the projects that they're proposing or hoping to build. And the city can't really tell the school district where to build those schools. So while we could certainly, at your direction, we could try and put in some general guidance into the general plan about school locations, it really is an issue that's strictly up to the school districts to make decisions about where they place their schools. I will point out that the construction of a new school is a project under CEQA, so it does have to be reviewed through either a negative declaration or a full environmental impact report, and that would be a time that any conflicts with agricultural operations, and particularly with aerial spraying, would be considered, and it would be up to the school district to make a determination as to whether that's a conflict or not.
Thank you. With regard to the level of service, I noted the roadways that were discussed, and I'm wondering if it would be wise to factor in the future growth, a conversation about the level of service as it relates to Fairview as well as Union Avenue, because Fairview is becoming quite a busy road, and my anticipation is it's only going to continue to become busier as we continue to build out.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I am fortunate that we have Frederick Venter here from Kimberly Horn, who's our traffic engineer. Maybe he can be recognized, if that's the word, and allowed to speak on this subject. I think the question you're asking is whether it's realistic to assume that Fairview and Union would continue to meet level of service C, or whether they also need an alternative standard. Frederick,
correct,
do you want to unmute yourself and speak to that?
Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
There we go. Yep. So Union Road and Fairview are definitely arterial streets serve the city in a bigger picture, right? Getting in and out of the city and getting around. So, as we develop the future general plan, roadway and circulation system, we have, through the level of service recommendations, made the finding that we should maintain some levels of service on certain of the streets, and we will surely endeavor in maintaining levels of service on these arterials, to move cars. So we're not, we're abandoning level of service for environmental purposes, but the city can still try and maintain the operations through level of service that, as David has explained it. David, does that help?
And I think, Frederick, you're saying that you do believe that maintaining LOSC along those two corridors is realistic even into the future. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. And if we do get to a point where level of service C is not feasible, we will report back, right? And then maybe we can, you know, if it needs to be, we get to a point where the intersection could potentially get so big that maintaining a level of service C is just not feasible anymore, right? But we will report back on that if we now take the future land uses that is being approved tonight, or, you know, as this general plan moves forward, and we actually see what the impact is of future growth in both the city and the county, and what the levels of service will be on those roads.
Thank you. With regards to the conversation on housing, was it taken into account in consideration the accessory dwelling units as we build out? I know that in some instances there have been in-law quarters that have been built in the recent past 20 years over near what was our Target store and our kind of in that area, Target and Walmart. And again, was that taken into account in consideration? I know that there's already a lot of provisions that allow for it.
Frederick, you want to go ahead and answer that too?
So we have not yet done any analysis, right? So in the land use assumptions that you have in front of you, it's usually based on densities, and densities will be confirmed or basically translated into number of units, and the units is what we'll use in the end to do trip generation to then assess the traffic that will go onto the network. So David, is that correct from my side?
Yeah, yes, that's absolutely correct.
Okay, so maybe in lay terms, so that would definitely, my interpretation would be that would be taken into consideration as we move forward to build out and give developers and consumers other alternatives to hit our numbers and provide that.
Yeah, that's right. And particularly it will be taken into account in this next step that happens over the next several months, where we'll be creating a database of expected land uses in all parts of the city. They aren't going to be vastly different from those already in your general plan, but we'll ensure that we have a complete assessment, and then Frederick will model that and look at it through the year 2040 and ensure that he continues to believe that LOSC is appropriate. And that's a time where we could conceivably come back to you and say, well, we looked at this and actually we think we cannot do it. Or as Frederick said, it may be that over time we see traffic patterns differ from what's modeled today, in which case it might be in the future that we have to change that standard. But we'll first report that to you as part of the general plan itself and its EIR that you'll be seeing in the fall.
Well, thank you. And I guess my final question may in fact actually be for the city manager. And I heard you say that the recommendation is that we do not renew an MOU that is currently in place and it's going to expire in sometime this summer. And so have we already notified those folks, or have we, I presume that this isn't the first time they're going to be hearing about this. And are there any, sounds like there's a sound rationale not to, but are there any consequences that would be immediate consequences to not renewing that MOU?
There are potential consequences. We are in conversation with the different agencies right now because there is their desire to continue that contract. So I'll keep the council informed of how that conversation is going with them.
Thank you, City Manager. Thank you, sir. Mayor, that concludes my questions and thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Resendez?
Thank you. I have a question too. If we can go back to the buffer slide, if you can find it, the buffer slide.
That would be about, if I can say, about probably 10 to 12 slides back. If you go backwards, I can tell you when you get to it.
Yeah, and I was wondering too,
Other way, I'm sorry, the other way, whoever's running the slides. Yeah, keep going back now about 10 slides.
I'm just wondering, Mr. Early, how do we create or how do we ensure that what like
There,
a
that's the
buffer
one.
is?
Up too far, yeah. Next one.
No, that was,
There, nope, the other way.
you were on it.
Go 2 forward. There we go, that's it.
So how do we determine a buffer? Like what language can we put in there to ensure that a buffer is, and that it doesn't get moved over time? I mean,
Right.
it's just a little ambiguous.
Buffers, this is a subject I've studied quite a bit through my career, and honestly, it's a very tricky thing. I've worked on them extensively in Butte County and in Chico, in Davis and Yolo County, in Tracy and San Joaquin County. And what you find is that there's the issue that you just mentioned, council member, which is that if you establish a buffer and then there's pressure for development on the outside of the buffer, then you have, you may need another buffer, and you may end up with a buffer that doesn't have much utility to it if it's then between two urbanized areas. So that's one issue. And also there's a question of, well, what do you actually do in that buffer? You presumably, the whole point is it doesn't have it doesn't have urban uses, and presumably it doesn't have agricultural uses either, because you're trying to buffer them from each other. And so it can be complicated to think about what can you actually do there. Some good solutions to all of that, number one, are that you really do want to make a commitment to thinking of a certain area as the edge of your ultimate urbanization. And the existence of the buffer itself really makes a difference there. Other things that can make a difference are acquiring the development rights using your agricultural mitigation fees for the agricultural land immediately adjacent to the buffer area, so that that land is preserved as agricultural in perpetuity. And some communities also consider an urban limit line or urban growth boundary, sometimes that's adopted by the council, sometimes adopted by a vote of the people, that designates a certain area beyond which the city will not annex or develop. In your case, it's also further complicated by the fact that San Benito County has a long history of urban development. For example, Butte County and Yolo County are two where the counties don't really allow any significant urbanization near the city boundaries. And so in those cases, if the cities don't develop, then no one does. In your case, it could be that although you would limit development and you would have a buffer, it's conceivable that the county might do development beyond that buffer. So that's the question of city-county coordination becomes very important as well. I would encourage that you, to direct answer your question, I would encourage that you consider really strongly exactly where that should be, that you consider using the agricultural fees to acquire development rights, that you consider very strong coordination with the county, and if you think it's appropriate, that you consider an urban growth boundary, or otherwise known as an urban limit line.
Thank you. I think that's important, and I'm hoping that we can prioritize that, because I just feel like if we don't address this now, then it could be a huge problem. It doesn't seem like it's clearly defined, and I think we need to essentially like lock it in and ensure that we protect those buffer areas, right? So I like both the ideas. I think I'm not too familiar with the first option, but I am familiar with the urban growth boundary, and I'd like for us to prioritize looking into that and addressing that soon.
Okay.
If we can.
If I may, I would say that that's probably too big a lift, if you will, to set one through this general plan process. But with your direction, we could have an action in the general plan that once the general plan is adopted over the next few years, the city might have a project to try and establish a consensus urban growth boundary for the city.
Yeah, no, I understand that, Mr. Early. I was hoping that we can have that conversation as a council, but I think that's great that we include it in the general plan if the council agrees to that, and then if we can have that conversation soon. My second question was about the biologist. So I'm just wondering, given what happened with the Fairview development, and I can't remember all the details, how we got around building on a habitat that's sensitive. So I'm just wondering how to ensure that a biologist is like non-biased, or is there some type of language we can put in there to ensure that we protect those areas and that we don't run into those problems that we had with the previous development that occurred there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. Also, I'm not sure that there's language that we would put in. If you can go, let me think. We go forward, I think, about 2 slides. Just to have that language up there. Who's ever running the slides, can you move forward first one and make sure we're going in the right direction? Yeah, and then go one more. So the language here, it says required a qualified biologist to evaluate the area. And it really is up to the the city who's going to be reviewing the work of that biologist to ensure that they are really qualified biologists. There have, unfortunately, been some pretty notorious cases in Northern California over the last 20 years or so, where it was found that there were biologists who were even qualified, but actually somewhat purposefully made findings that were not consistent with the actual conditions on the ground, and where they, in some cases, actually placed species in places to make it seem that there were species there which hadn't actually been there, and in other cases, places where they had failed to report species that they had found in order for a development project to move forward. So presumably a qualified biologist doesn't do those things. It's very difficult to completely guard against them. Just, it's like an accountant. If an accountant embezzles money, what do you do? The one thing that you can do is ensure that any work by your qualified biologist is also peer reviewed by another biologist to ensure that they have the same findings and that they believe that this is both a qualified individual and that person's findings are substantiated. But in the end, you do have to rely on the professional knowledge and technical knowledge of the biologists to do the work.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. I'd like to just, if we can, avoid any problems like we had in the past, and if we can, just introduce some type of language that it's a qualified biologist from like a different agency or like a non-biased third party.
I think the wording we would probably use is required a qualified biologist with appropriate peer review to evaluate the potential. And that's the term of art that's used to say not only will you have one biologist do the work, but you'll have a peer review as well.
As an accountant, that's what the accounting field also does.
I'm sorry if I maligned anyone's profession there.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Perez, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I got a couple. You said something about the city may be violating the state law by, what was it, annexing? I'm not sure which, I kind of
Yeah, I can speak to that, and staff may want to as well. I want to be clear, it's not about annexing. We could go forward a few slides and we'll put the language up there, which may help to track this. Let's go forward. I'll tell you when to stop. That was too far. Sorry. Go back about 3, backwards here.
hotter, colder.
This one, there we go. So what we're referring to here is Government Code Section 56133, which is within the laws that are about annexations. But within those laws about annexations is this one Government Code section that talks about extension of services without annexation. And what the law says is that cities that provide services may only provide services outside their city limits under 2 circumstances. The first of those and this is where there has perhaps been some service provision that should not have occurred in the past. Number 1 is that if you're outside the city limit, but inside the sphere of influence, you can only provide services in areas where you expect to annex in the future. The term expect is not defined. The term future is not defined, but you should be making a finding to provide service outside the city limits, but inside the sphere. You should be making a finding that future annexation is expected. And I'm not sure that was always the case, because in fact, these development projects occurred under county auspices and have remained under county auspices. And I don't think that there was discussion about the city annexing them in the future. So you would need to find that once the county does that development, that you are planning to annex it. That would be the condition under the law for extension of services inside the sphere. Outside the sphere, it's an even more restrictive situation, which is that you are not allowed to extend services like sewer outside of the sphere unless you are addressing an immediate or pending health and safety threat. So an example of that, which I think you're all familiar with, is that the city of San Juan Bautista, which is a separate incorporated city, obviously outside your own sphere, they have a documented immediate public health and safety threat that's been pointed out by state and federal regulators. The city of San Juan does have to do something to address that issue. and the city of Hollister has said that it's going to consider extending sewer service to that city to address that threat. That's different, though, from a piece of agricultural land that's somewhat close to the city of Hollister, which obviously does not have to be developed. There's not a threat created by the agricultural use of that land. If it were to stay undeveloped, there would be no issue. And the city has extended sewer service nonetheless to some of those parcels outside of the city limits where county development was proposed. And again, it's not completely clear whether that extension of services was in accordance with Government Code Section 56133. There have been no, I want to state clearly because it sounds like there was confusion, there have been no annexations that we believe were in violation of law. And in fact, if any of those lands, whether inside or outside the SOI, if they had been annexed before providing service, that would have addressed the problem. And that would be a different way to address this issue. Rather than deciding not to extend service out to those areas, you could decide to incorporate those areas, and then you would be able to extend services to them. The GPAC did consider that option and elected not to do that, but that would be another way to address the same issue.
Thank you. You've been very informative on all the topics. Oh, and one other question, actually. Electrification, is this part of any of the policy topics that you were talking about earlier?
I'm not sure what you mean. Do you mean electrification of railroads or?
Railroads, I don't know if that would even be part of this. No.
No, this is a.
Well, we don't have policies in the general plan at this point regarding the railroads at all. I think we may end up adding a very brief policy saying that the city maintains an interest in future rail service, because we've heard that a number of times. But as the mayor already mentioned in this meeting, there was a recent study by the COG, which found that it would be very, very expensive to extend passenger rail service, and it's not financially feasible given the ridership. Given that there's no plan for future passenger rail service, there's also no plan to electrify the rail line. And I'm not sure if that was your question, but there is nothing in the general plan about electrification of rail service.
Councilmember Perez, were you referring more towards like a solar panel, electrical alternatives for development and so forth?
Yes.
Yes. So that would also be a part of housing element as well, where we can eventually come. The housing element, currently we have a certified housing element within our general plan, so therefore it is not being considered with this general plan update, but that is also going to be coming up for discussion very shortly, where we will start our update of our housing element, and we can certainly implement requirements for solar and energy alternatives for that. But we definitely we are following the state requirements for the building code currently, and implementing those with any new permit that's being processed within our City Development Services Department.
And Abraham, I don't know that law off the top of my head. I don't know if you know, but I know that state law and the state building code already come close, if not completely requiring solar, or will require it soon on almost all new residential construction.
It does require it,
correct.
and all new residential does require it now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That is correct. Yes. It just a little bit before, I think it was required to be solar ready, but now it is actually solar required, like
Yes.
the mayor said. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions, sir? Councilmember Perez? No. No other question? Okay. I do have a couple questions. I do want to step back really quick to have a brief conversation on the services and how this came about, and what the last question was, the wastewater. This was discovered about 4 years ago, when there was a proposed development in the county, and the question was for the city to provide sewer. I pointed out it's not in the city. It's so far away from the city that it would be a big mistake. And after some research was done, it was noted that it would basically be a violation of the law to provide services to that area. Unfortunately, it was passed anyways. And this is kind of one of the conversations about why it's so important to do this updated document and be very clear about it, because what was used was basically a loophole to get around the law. But it was very clear to everybody that if somebody challenged it, it would fail and it would be ruled against them. So this is why this is so important, so we don't have those issues happen to us again in the future of our community, because it really does have a negative impact to us. I have a few questions you can help me with. The conversation about the schools, the fees, we had two options that we talked about. And I know when we had these conversations, we also mentioned if there was a potential to add the CFDs on some of these developments. And I didn't see that option when you pointed out the two. Is that because we were looking for the developer to kind of create an idea to help with that, or?
Yes, that's absolutely right. And if we can go, again, going to the slides, go back about 5 slides just to make sure we have the language up. We've worked with this policy quite a bit and tried to make it as inclusive as possible. Let's just keep going backwards. About 3 more slides back. This one right here. Oops, too far. That one. You'll see number 2 says require the preparation of a specific plan, financing plan. Just recently we had a development agreement, and it could certainly include or establishment of a CFD, a community facilities district, or other similar document as a precondition for annexation or redesignation. So this would be where a CFD would fit. I would characterize it as an other similar document, but I think it would be fine to add here a CFD as another clearly articulated option as one of the ways that these issues could be addressed.
Thank you. I think this is probably one of the biggest items we have next to the road issue. Our schools are being impacted. I was lucky enough to go to the ribbon cutting today at one of the new schools, but I want to give everybody an update on these numbers, because I heard you mention the cost of a school. This is a K through 8, and that school is about $50 million, and the amount of money collected from impact fees was about $13 million. So I think people can add that up pretty quickly. A high school is more in the neighborhood of $150 million, and our high school currently is at full capacity. And there is a need now to have a second high school. So we can see the impacts, and this is one of the reasons I've talked about this in the past, about not annexing land until we have a better answer on our schools and what we're going to do, because there's already several thousand homes approved in the pipeline. Every 2,000 homes pretty much is equivalent of a new K through 8 school, and we have 4,000 to 5,000 already approved within the city and the county. So it's very important that we get the answer to this, and hopefully we can work with the developers to understand the need for the CFD. The other question I had for you, when we talked about multifamily, with the single family homes, the conversation was with every 40 units to have about 10% multifamily. I obviously probably am wrong on this, but I thought that number, their recommendation was higher. And is that something we could still raise up to maybe 25 to 30% multifamily within mixed in with the single family, or is that, how would that work? Is there requirements that we can do that or can't do that? Oh, you're on mute, sorry.
Sorry about that. Just from a process perspective, I do want to make sure that we remember to finish up questions, go to public comment, and then come back for discussion. Okay. But with that said, as a question, yes, our understanding was that the GPAC had made this requirement at 10%. And this is not, although it's included in the inclusionary section, it's not strictly about inclusionary, because these are just the unit type, which the GPAC recommended that there be a multifamily component in all projects and that there be no 100% single family projects. It's our understanding, or it was my understanding, and Carrie Stone, who's on the meeting tonight also, she took careful notes and reviewed the minutes as needed. I'm pretty sure that it was 10% that the GPAC suggested. But the reason we're here tonight is ultimately to get the direction from the council. And if you were to direct tonight that that number should not be 10%, that it should be 15, 20, 25, whatever, we would certainly change that. I would mention that by itself, even at 10%, it's a pretty unusual requirement. I'm not sure I know of any city in the state that has a similar requirement. There is right now, suddenly over the last 6 months, there's been a lot of traction to no longer have single family zoning in our communities and to allow multifamily within the context of single family homes. That is an idea that's gaining a lot of traction, but there's not really been an idea to prohibit 100% single family if that's what developers want to build. And I would just point out that I think the reason that for a developer it's attractive to build say 100% single family project is that it's a single unit type that can be built more economically if you build them all at once following similar patterns. If you have a requirement that some of the units have to be single family, some have to be multifamily, that's going to be a more complicated project for the developer to build, and hence might create inefficiencies or might lead to higher home prices overall. So again, it's unusual, but going back to your original question, if you want that number to be not 10%, but 20 or 30%, whatever I'm not just quoting numbers I think I heard you say, Mr. Mayor, that would be up to the council to direct that. And I'd add finally that if you didn't do it tonight and you wanted to do it when you go to actually adopt the general plan a year from now, you can do it then also. You can change that number.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to make sure that we could do that. And we'd be blazing trails again here in Hollister. So I'm okay with that.
That would be true.
If there's no other questions from council, then we'll open it to public.
I see Councilmember Burns' hand is up.
We can't see
Thank you.
it.
Yes, Mayor, I have one follow-up
Go ahead,
question
sir.
that may actually fall in line with what we're talking about. Sir, in your presentation, you talked about affordable housing requirements at 15% with an opportunity or a recommendation to increase it to 20% that would require or invoke a state review. Can you speak more in regards to that? And I don't know if you can frame it from our local or regional area of other jurisdictions that have done similar or like requirements.
Yeah, I think I might be able to, but I'm gonna actually call on Carrie in a few moments. So Carrie, just to warn you, I don't know if you can look on your background information and see what some of the other local cities have done. I know we assembled that information. And while Carrie's looking for that, let me say that the law on this, this is a pretty obscure law and I'm honestly not sure I'm 100% conversant with it. The law says either or both, that the law stems from a court case that surrounded an inclusionary program for rental housing only. And a court ruled some years ago that it was illegal to have an inclusionary program for rental housing. The legislature and governor thought that that was wrong. And so they overruled the court, if you will, by particularly passing a law. And they said, if it's illegal today, we're going to make it legal. They said, we really want to enable local communities to have inclusionary programs on rental housing. But because the court case only concerned rental housing, the new law only concerns rental housing also. And what the law says is that for rental housing projects, at least, if they go above a 15% discretionary, a 15% inclusionary requirement, then that requirement has to be scrutinized through a feasibility study and is subject to approval by HCD. My understanding is that in some cases, HCD has then taken the ability to look at the rental program and has also done an analysis of an inclusionary program for sale units. Although my understanding of the law is that the law is particularly relevant to the rental housing units. So it's certainly the case if you have a rental program at all, HCD will review it. And it's also the case that if your rental program is over 15%, you have to justify it through a feasibility study. And I would suggest that if you're going to do a feasibility study anyway, you should go ahead and cover the for sale side of the program and make sure that it's feasible as well. So that's the first half of your question. And Carrie, I don't know if we can recognize you to turn your microphone on. And do you have handy the requirements in some of the other cities we looked at?
Sure. So Monterey County requires 20%. Morgan Hill has a 15% requirement. The city of Salinas has a 15 to 20% for for-sale projects. It depends on the affordability level. And for rental projects, 12 to 20%, depending on affordability levels. And the city of San Jose has a 15% requirement.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate the information.
I'm having a hard time hearing, I'm sorry.
My microphone was off, sorry. I said if there's no other questions from the council, we will now go to the public for their questions.
We have one speaker, Joe Tanasia.
Go ahead, Mr. Tanasia.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, sir.
Okay. Yeah, my name's Joe Tanasha. Just a couple comments on what was the section? Farmland mitigation. Just be careful when you're using conservation organizations for management responsibilities. I think you need to do something better than that. Organizations you talk to need to have people that are in production agriculture that know what's going on and how it's going these days. And on the Union Road area, I can't say that I'm in favor of that agricultural zoning there. Prime farmland, unique farmland, and farmland of statewide importance. I don't think that is over there anywhere. I do think you're right. You need to preserve it. You need to have open space and you need to have agricultural, but who's going to maintain it after you have it? Because it'll be a dump. The municipal service area, that's okay. I think you guys, in reference to Mr. Burns's questions about buffers, I can speak firsthand to that. Buffers in agriculture can vary, especially if you're in the row crop business, from 30 feet to 400 feet. And it's all based on food safety. And you even have safety with orchards now that's run by the USDA. Most of the places you guys are looking at preserving agriculture around Hollister, if you have a road, like I saw one of the projections for the Buena Vista area would have a road between the agriculture and the residential, that helps. But it's a tough situation. Schools, we are very heavily mandated already, Mr. Burns, and how that goes. I have to sign a permit every year. I get a new permit and it has restrictions on spraying and what has to be done, and also notifications to the schools on this, and not just the schools across the street or next door. One thing I did notice that goes along with the sewer and what we were talking about on the legal or illegal, and I don't know why it's not addressed, or maybe it is in something else, is the water issue for the county and with everything going on in the state and the Sigma. I don't see anything related to Sigma in here and the city's participation mentioned or help in the Sigma issue with the Groundwater Sustainability Act. And if you got any questions, feel free to contact me outside of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Next, we have Patricia Salcido.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before you this evening. I'm Pat Salcido, speaking on behalf of BIA Bay Area, an association representing home building and support industries across the Bay Area. We submitted a letter earlier today, and I want to stress that BIA is strongly opposed to the new school funding policy language contained in the June 10th Executive Summary Memo before you this evening. As stated in our letter, it is clear the intent of the proposed newly revised language is to condition project approvals in future specific plans, financing plans, development agreements, or similar documents to exact more in school fees from development than state law allows. Our objection and opposition includes the policy language contained in the first bullet point of the proposed policy that speaks to additional density, setbacks, building heights, and reduced parking. State law SB 50 has preempted and prohibits local governments from denying or withholding the approval of housing projects based on a refusal to provide school facility mitigation measures beyond that expressly authorized and limited by state statute. Relevant excerpts of SB 50 are included in my letter for your reference. For the proposed Parks and Recreation policy, BIA wants to point out and ensure that the council is aware that under the Quimby Act, if the city increases their standard for parkland by new development to 5 acres per 1,000 persons by general plan policy, the city cannot charge new development for more than 3 acres per 1,000 residents. Again, I have relevant Quimby Act statutes contained in my letter for you to review. In closing, BIA recommends that the only language that should be included in the new school funding policy section as it relates to new housing development is an acknowledgement that SB 50 preempts the field of new school facility construction funding. We believe that is really all that should be in the policy statement for new school funding. Thank you again this evening for your time and your attention. It's much appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Janet Mueller.
Good evening. Hopefully you can all hear me.
Yes,
My name is Janet Mueller. I'm an attorney with the firm of Dennis Waller Kelly, and we represent the San Benito High School District. I'm here on behalf of the district to voice its support for the GPAC recommendations for new school funding that are described in the policy options memo prepared by PlaceWorks and also discussed tonight as part of the PlaceWorks report. On several prior occasions, and again by letter dated today from Mr. Sean Tenenbaum, the superintendent of the high school district has described to the city the critical space and capacity shortage it's experiencing at the high school. With just under 3,500 students expected to enroll in the fall, the school is officially now over capacity. And unless we're going to start taking away parking or athletic field space, there's no space even for portable classrooms. We understand and believe the city's been made aware of how serious the problems are, and we won't use further time here tonight to characterize the problem. We've reviewed the specific recommendations for new school funding that were developed through the process and are confident that there are lawful approaches for the city to include in its general plan as approaches to assisting in solving the school capacity crisis associated with residential development. First, nothing in either recommendation requires any developer to pay additional fees or funds to the school district for the privilege of receiving basic development entitlements. That said, and maybe to the point raised by the prior speaker, currently the city has actually regained some authority to impose conditions on new development. Since the failure of the last state school bond measure in March of 2020, the state does not have a ready source of new construction funds for school facilities. And as a result, a dormant statute that's part of the original 1998 SB 50 legislation has now become operative during the state funding dry period to again give cities some discretion to condition environmental approvals and legislative development approvals on financing options, including the use of Melrose community facilities districts to pay for new school construction. Conditioning new development on participation in Melrose financing, as I heard one council member mention, would be a lawful way to ensure that future homeowners pay at least some of the cost of new schools that serve that development. In sum, the district certainly appreciates the city's continued advocacy to ensure that school facility development keeps pace with construction in Hollister. At this point, we see no reason why the city should not continue to include the GPAC recommendations in the draft general plan and EIR, and appreciate your consideration of these important measures tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next we have Mark Ogonowski.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Ogonowski. I'm a biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'd like to direct some comments to the proposed sensitive habitats policies, which would provide additional protections for California tiger salamander and California red-legged frog critical habitat, and the relationship of those proposed policies to the letter, the comment letter that we submitted at the end of April, which was referenced in the PlaceWorks policy options menu. First of all, just a thank you on behalf of the Fish and Wildlife Service for the city and the community being willing to consider increasing the potential conservation opportunities for those species. Jurisdictions such as the city of Hollister are really fundamental partners in us achieving our mission, so it's much appreciated that this is even being considered. Regarding the policies themselves, the first of the two, the one requiring a qualified biologist to conduct an habitat assessment, that's one we would pretty fully support. No real comment on that. The second one, which begins avoid development in areas with high quality habitat. The main comment I want to make here is that was definitely one of the possible policy recommendations put forward in our letter. I think our intention in that comment letter, which maybe didn't come through as clearly as we could have had it, was to offer several options for the city to consider. For example, another alternative that we put out was, rather than preventing development, to allow development to proceed, but to require mitigation offsite and to base the extent or the amount of mitigation through example, a mitigation ratio, to base that on the assessed quality of the habitat for each species on the project site. So that was, put forward as another option that you could consider. You might even consider a scenario whereby you offered a project developer an alternative. On the one hand, avoid the most sensitive areas of habitat within your parcel and restrict the extent of your development footprint, versus allow complete development and then gauge the offsite mitigation on the assessed habitat quality by a biologist. So my main point is just that you're all clear that we provided a number of alternatives for you to consider, and I'm happy to provide more comment on those as desired. The other, and just an example of where offsite mitigation has worked really well, is the Santana Ranch project on Fairview, which led to the creation of the Sparling Ranch Conservation Bank, which is, I'd say, much higher quality habitat than that which was lost through the development. The last couple quick points I want to make is I would strongly urge the city to consult with San Benito County, given that some of these areas are in unincorporated lands at the moment, and also with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, who also has oversight for the California tiger salamander under the State Endangered Species Act, and they have their own mitigation requirements. Happy to take any questions or assist offline down the road. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Next, we have Jeffrey Small.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Council members. My name is Jeffrey Small of Capital Public Finance Group. I am here representing the San Benito High School District with Janet Mueller, the district's legal counsel, who you heard from just 2 speakers ago. Superintendent Tannenbaum and the Board of Trustees have their own board meeting tonight and were unable to attend. Dr. Tannenbaum provided a letter to the City Council in advance of this meeting and asked me to follow up to his letter and comment on this item. As the mayor indicated, San Benito High School is at or near capacity. With the current development underway, the district will soon need to construct an additional high school. The district strongly supports the GPAC's recommended policy initiatives for new school funding. The policy initiatives are strong and will motivate developers to support the district in constructing a second high school. The policy initiatives will also help Hollister keep up with the demand for housing without compromising the excellent schools that have served the community for generations. We are aware that the Building Industry Association has expressed concerns about school-related fees. However, you heard from the district's legal counsel that we are confident that the language contained in the initiative presented tonight is legal and appropriate. Most importantly, we would be very happy to work cooperatively with the BIA and the development community. With that, I would like to thank the mayor, City Council, GPAC, and PlaceWorks for its support and for arranging many opportunities for community input. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's no one else with their hand raised, so there's no more comments.
Thank you. Mr. Early, we'll come back to you.
All right, thank you very much. At this point, Mr. Mayor, I would suggest that you work with the council to go through the 8 items that I've talked about. It's probably most expeditious just to do them one at a time. We can, if necessary, put the slides back up just to remind everyone of what the topics are. You could, if you prefer, you could ask council members to identify which individual items, if any, they want to talk about, but it might be just as quick to just start with the issue of public funding for facilities, go one more forward. We call it here new school funding. It's really been broadened to cover all types of facility funding. And we could go to the next slide, which has the recommended language on it. And I'll turn it over to you, but, oh, we missed one. There should be a slide in between there. There we go. So those are the recommendations there. And I think it's quickest just for you to ask council members if these are okay as stated, or if there are any changes. And there's a total of 8 of these slides with 8 different sets of recommendations. If there are no comments, that's fine. We can just move on. If there are changes or issues, you could take those. Honestly, there's not a need for all 4 council members to voice support for each of these 8 things, but certainly any changes you have, we would want to talk about them now.
Thank you. Yeah, and we'll start with the school funding. Is there conversations from council on that? Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I strongly support your suggestions, both 1 and 2. This is a conversation that we've had for quite a while in intergovernmental. And I've got to say, I'm surprised not to hear representation from the Hollister School District or the county as well, because they have came to those meetings and they've showed us their projections of what the surveys that they have done. And it's frightening, to be quite honest with you. So I think that we not only should require, but I think if we can add even a number 3, if an agreement's not made, that we can default to some type of CFD if an agreement is not made between the school districts, because I really think this is vital. It's critical. We're way behind, and it's been expressed to us from the County Board of Education, Hollister School District, and the high school. So thank you to the high school for showing up today. But this is something that I think that is pretty vital and we need to address. So if we can include a number 3, that would really just solidify that the schools are protected and that their interests are being met. I would really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from council?
I'd just like to say that it's like, our children are our future, and we definitely need to invest in our children. I support this. It's anything to help our children is going to make our future that better. It's going to make their future that better, actually. And so I support both of these.
Thank you. Mr. Burns, any comments?
Thank you, Mayor. I would support them as well, and I would support Vice Mayor Resendez's recommendation as well to add a 3rd item.
All right, we'll bring it back to you, Mr. Early. Any comments on?
Yeah, I would just encourage you maybe to ask us to look at that 3rd item, but these are very complicated legal issues, and we certainly don't want to exceed what state law would provide for. And I would, in that vein, I would point out that this number 2 applies for discretionary actions like annexation and redesignation. And in fact, there's no way you can be forced to go into a discretionary action like that. You don't have to annex the land. You don't have to redesignate land for new urban use. So I'm not sure that there really is a number 3 where if you failed to come to an agreement that you would put a CFD in place. I think if you failed to come to an agreement, you would simply not annex or you would not redesignate the land. With that said, I certainly understand what several council members have said, that you want what I would call a belt and suspenders approach here. You want to really underscore that the city strongly, I see the council member is wearing a belt and suspenders. So I'm hearing that all of you really want to underscore the fact that you are strongly supportive of ensuring that all public facilities, including public schools, are adequately funded, and that the city does not want to engage in additional discretionary development that would endanger the adequacy of facilities. And I think we all know that there's no legal mandate that the city would engage in those discretionary developments. So I think this language is enough, but I understand the concern, and with your permission, we'll consider it, but we may or may not come back with additional language. We may also just fine tune this language to ensure that it's both clear and comprehensive and also completely legally sound.
Thank you. And I reading through item number 2, I'm in agreement with you. I think it's pretty clear that the precondition could be for the annexation some sort of agreement, and I think it's one of the things we needed to think about in the past. But I'm pleased to see this now. I think it's a path we need to be very clear, very strong on this, because I think unfortunately, too many times they've been approved with "we'll worry about it later." But I want to be clear, and I think this does make that clear, that the city, we're going to look into making sure our schools are covered first. So, but Mr. Resendez, we'll bring it back to you one more time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Then I'm just wondering if we can really solidify that fact. If an agreement is not made, then we do not annex the land in.
That's part of the precondition.
Yeah.
Of the document. So I think it covers that in that item.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Does that cover your question, sir? Thank you, Mr. Early. We'll now move to
All right, so who's ever running the slides, you could go forward, I believe, 2 slides.
We'll go to farmland mitigation.
Farmland mitigation, and we have the 4 points here.
Does anyone have any questions on this? I'm fine with this myself also. Mr. Burns, are you all right with number 2, or farmland mitigation?
Yes, Mayor, I am. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we'll go to sensitive habitats. Is there any questions from council on this item?
None.
Resendez, did you have a question?
I was just wondering if we can include the other suggestions from the gentleman that was on from the Fish and Wildlife. I just feel like the more protection, the better.
I would like to speak to that. So it's actually the next slide here, now that we're on sensitive habitats, which has the language. I think that what Mr. Ogonoski was talking about, and if I can paraphrase, is that he was suggesting creating additional options for the developers. And one of them was to do off-site mitigation, which simultaneously has the advantage, as he pointed out, of possibly preserving higher quality habitat than the habitat that's on site, but simultaneously has, if you will, the downside of allowing the development to proceed in the areas that are in question. And I think, at least for the GPAC, one of the issues was that they really wanted to try and minimize the potential for development in the areas that have habitat. If it's good enough quality that a biologist has found it to be high quality habitat, then it should be avoided. And Mr. Ogonoski certainly, I think, legally is correct that it is another option to allow limited development in those areas and mitigate them off-site. But I believe the GPAC did consider that option. I'm not sure Mr. Ogonoski understood that, but the GPAC did consider that option and decided that the GPAC at least wanted the mitigation to occur on site without a loss of even, call it, high level habitat instead of preserving highest quality habitat elsewhere. This is a policy option, whether to allow that second option or not. But I guess I just want to point out that it would not be that you would be doing more, it would that you would be creating 2 or more alternative pathways. And I think the GPAC felt like only this one pathway was the one that was appropriate for Hollister.
And I think you covered that well, and I would agree. I think the issue here would be we would be moving it to another location, which means we would be losing it here where we can enjoy the habitat. So I would rather stick with what we came up with originally. Anything else from the council members?
Mayor Velasquez.
Go ahead, Councilmember Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. I would support it as proposed as well, with the addition of the peer review element for item number 1.
And I would agree with that. Mr. Early, we'll now move to level of service.
Correct. That would be 2 more slides forward. Right, and this one actually, there are 2 slides. So this is the slide about the downtown, and then the next slide is about the industrial area. I think it's probably more instructive to look at the previous slide. You could leave it up on the screen, but just be aware that there is the industrial area as well.
Thank you. Is there any questions from council on this item? Mr. Burns, do you have any questions?
Mayor, they've been asked and answered. Thank you.
I'm sorry, sir?
They've been asked and answered. Thank you.
Okay. We'll now go on to growth management.
So that would be 2 more, I believe. 2 more slides. Here we go. This is the correct slide. So here we have a couple of additional annexation areas or SOI areas on the north-south side of town, and then a policy that require wastewater treatment services to be extended only in accordance with Government Code Section 56133, and then a policy statement that the existing MOU would not be renewed.
Thank you. Councilmember Resendez?
Thank you. I think this is the appropriate place. I would just say that I would suggest, or I would support the increase of 10% for multifamily, whatever that number is.
That's actually, if I can stop you, that's actually another place. I'll be happy to point it out where
Got
it
it.
is.
Thank you.
But sorry to interrupt.
220, right?
Yeah, be another one. But on this item, is there any questions from council? Comments?
Mayor Velasquez.
Go ahead, Mr. Burns.
So again, my only focus would be on item number 3, and I'm wondering if the city manager can provide us with a time when an update will be provided to us, whether or not to abandon or not renew the current MOU.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at my schedule. I believe we are meeting on that sometime this week. So I'll hopefully by Friday.
Well, I think maybe it'd be helpful to understand the MOU, the issues that were with this agreement were the thought that the city would automatically provide sewer to any development that the county, that Sunny Slope Water was providing water to. That was the agreement. This is when we found out it doesn't work that way. That's not the legal way of doing these things. That's what that agreement, that discussion is about. Am I correct, Mr. City Manager?
You're correct.
Yeah.
No, got it.
So would that be the case in every instance, or would there be certain instances where an MOU would still be appropriate?
I think we have the MOU to have, where we can share resources, as Sunny Slope serves most of the east side of the city, and we work together on some of those items, and as we work together on the water treatment plant with the San Benito County Water also. So I think some of those MOUs are about sharing resources, but as far as the portion of automatically receiving sewer service because one of the other agencies is providing water, that's really the issue of the renewal of the MOU.
Yeah.
Correct.
That's what we're
And
talking about.
Mayor, if you, also I might add, also the issue is when a standalone property, not one that's being developed, has been on septic tank, and then there's a sewer line available to them, that it has been encouraged that they switch over to the sewer so that we can get them off of septic. It's like Mr. Hurley said, a development, part of the thought process was when a development went in, we did not want them to start using septic tanks. But as Mr. Hurley said, that development, currently doesn't have septic tanks, that we're not trying to remove those. So what we're trying to remove is the current houses that have septic. So that part is probably what we're going to negotiate.
Yes.
Great, thank you for the
I might
clarity.
add here, if I could interject, number 3 on this list, I think is unlikely to need to appear in the general plan itself because, as the city manager said, he expects to be able to report to you about this as early as next week. We're going to be bringing the general plan back to you in the fall for your action in summer of 2022. I think by that time, whether you do not renew the MOU or whether you have a new MOU, those issues will be long since settled. And so number 3 is really here just to point out that it's something that the GPAC and Planning Commission did speak about. Your city manager is working on it. There's a slim chance it will need to be in the general plan, and we'll put it in if necessary, but my hunch is that it will have been eclipsed by the time we get a general plan to you.
Okay, does that answer your question, Mr. Burns, your comment?
It does, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and move on now to special planning areas.
Yeah, so here we have these 3 maps. Buena Vista is this one. Maybe just go on one more. This is the Meridian Street area, and then finally the Union Road area. I guess, Mr. Mayor, I would ask if there are comments about any of these, and we can direct that the slides be shown for whichever one folks want to talk about.
Thank you. Is there any questions from council on these? Councilmember Resendez?
Not necessarily questions, but I'm just wondering if you can tell the other council members about the discussion about the Union Road special planning area, how we tried to preserve the agricultural feel, and why the GPAC feels that we need higher density there.
Right, I can speak to that, and council member, obviously you're a member of the GPAC, and I don't mind if you do either, but this was one of our most extensive discussions. The GPAC had a lot of extensive discussions, very thoughtful and intelligent. But this was among those many in-depth discussions, this was one of the most in-depth. And there was really a desire on the one hand to accommodate new needed residential development, to create an additional mixed use node with some commercial and other community facilities along Airline Highway, and both at close to Hollister, but also perhaps serving a part of Ridgemark as well, but also to preserve some of the agricultural qualities in the area. And I think the GPAC did that by seeing Union Road as a boundary, seeing Southside Road as a boundary, wanting to not expand the city all the way out to the far edges of this green area, but to see Union Road and Southside Road as the boundaries, to recognize that the school is there and to put residential development on either side of it, to use the 2 roads as buffers as well, and then to create this mixed use node with higher densities of residential and other mixtures of uses as well, and to do all of that through a specific plan. And then the other thing is that the specific plan would look for ways to preserve some of the agricultural quality in the area. For example, not to maintain the orchards as productive orchards, because we don't think that's feasible, but we do think it might be possible to, for instance, minimize grading and be able to save some currently orchard trees as part of the landscaping, say within a parking lot or within the yards of some of the homes or apartments. So those are the kinds of things that would be considered through the specific plan and to retain the agricultural character.
Thank you. Any questions, comments from council?
None.
Mr. Burns?
I have no comments, Mayor. I do support the plan as proposed.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We'll now move to residential land use designations.
Right, and so this would be the place, oh no, we're still not there, sorry. So this one is just about this new residential designation to have a minimum of 20 dwelling units per acre. It would be in a limited area, unlimited sites scattered throughout the city that you see on this map. And then also increasing the maximum densities in both the high density designation and the downtown designation to allow for higher densities of apartments and other kinds of multifamily units in those areas.
Thank you. Mr. Resendez?
Thank you. Mr. Early, if you can just speak to the fact that why we increased the residential density downtown to such a high number as opposed to what it was before. I think that's important for the other council members to know.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it is sort of, it looks like a big number, but if you look at actually the kinds of densities that you historically got in your downtown, they were much small. They're small buildings, relatively speaking, but they actually have sometimes 3, 5, 10 units in them on a very small parcel. And so the calculated density that you get in a project like that, and particularly if you go up to say 4 stories, you can pretty easily get to an effective density of 125 dwelling units per acre. A lower maximum density of 35 would end up looking much more suburban, if you will. It wouldn't have some of the qualities that your current downtown development does have. And this is a density that really is reflective of the urban design character of the downtown today.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Perez, did you have a question?
Yeah, so what's that number going from 35 to 125? Is there square footage on, that we have, that would each resident would have approximately? I mean, how big of a residential apartment are they gonna have?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the way that works out is actually that it's considered through the zoning code. And that's a level of detail that we can't get to in this project. PlaceWorks does prepare zoning codes, but this is not your zoning code project. When you finish the general plan, you will need to go back and amend the zoning code to put into effect all of these, what's really a limited number, but a limited number of new regulations. And that would be the place where you look at issues like unit size, open space requirements, and so forth. We have heard from planning commissioners, and particularly Commissioner Huboy, who, as I think you all know, is an architect practicing in the city. And he has said that some of the zoning regulations in the downtown, if left in place, would prohibit achieving these kinds of densities. And you will need to look at those in your zoning, but we haven't started to study that yet.
Thank you.
I could say from some experiences I've seen on these types of developments, usually the units range from about 600 square feet to about 1,300 square feet to cover from studio to 2 to 3 bedroom units. And it's kind of a mix to get the total units. All right, Mr. Burns, did you have any comments on this item?
I do, Mayor. Thank you. I do have some concerns about the significant increase in the density. And I was wondering if there is research or evidence that would suggest how it may impact the surrounding neighborhood or neighborhoods. You know, I mean, we saw as the city of Hollister built out where the cannery was built and how that built out, and that created some challenges, of course, and the cannery is a good partner and has worked well with the city recently and in the past as well, I believe. But I would like to hear more comments from the surrounding neighborhoods to see how that could impact, because I see that this has the potential to be a much change things significantly. And I'm more of a visual person, so I'd need to see more to understand this better. But perhaps during another conversation or at a future presentation, I'd also be curious to see what the surrounding neighborhoods, the community has expressed during the presentations that were made, if there was that impact.
Maybe what I can suggest here is that you direct us to just provide some additional detail as we move forward into the general plan. It may be that we want to limit this to San Benito Street itself and the blocks immediately adjacent to it, and that in the rest of the downtown we have a slightly lower number. We can certainly bring you some examples, visual examples of what these kinds of buildings look like, as well as some calculations of the densities that already exist in some of the historic buildings in Hollister.
Thanks. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's a great recommendation. Councilmember Resendez?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I believe, Mr. Early, that you said the new standard was much higher. Can we get back also some comparisons of surrounding communities and what their downtown residential density numbers are?
Sure. Yeah, I don't think we have researched those in the past, but we can certainly look into those.
Thank you.
And let me say, since I'm sure we'll bring you numbers that are somewhat lower than these. I think very few cities have been as progressive, if you will, on this subject, particularly in your own local area. So we may want to show you examples from places more in the Bay Area itself, where there are some historic downtowns, but where there are somewhat higher numbers. My guess is that if we look at just, say, Gilroy and Morgan Hill and Salinas, we may find the numbers are lower, but I think there are examples further in the Bay Area where you're seeing these kinds of densities in the codes.
I would say Gilroy actually is doing quite a few of these now, these types of numbers.
Yeah, so we can check on Gilroy and see what number they have in their designations.
Thank you. Councilmember Perez?
Yeah, my biggest concern would be, it's going to be interesting, but it is a concern, the parking. It's like, that's going to be a huge task, and I'm sure that our staff is gonna be able to overcome that. But yeah, cause that is an issue of parking downtown. We already have that issue, and, we have, I don't even know how many apartments we have downtown, but, Abraham?
Yeah, no, thank you, Councilmember Perez. That definitely is one issue. One thing that helps us at this time is that a big portion of our downtown is within an existing parking assessment district, but we definitely need to look into that and see. We have about 11 different parking stations throughout the downtown that are basically where units are able to use those parking lots. And in regards to the density aspect of it, one example that we can use is, for example, 500 San Benito Street, where it's the Hollister house, where the restaurant on the bottom, and then there's 3 stories on top. Right now, with our current density, because it's approximately 4,000 square feet, our current density are the highest number of units that can go there. 4,000, if you divide that into 43,560, which is an acre, it gives you 0.09. At 40 acres, a maximum of units that can go there is 4. And so really, at 3 stories, in talking with them, they're actually interested in doing 12 units. And if we raise it up to 125 dwelling units per acre, that would get them at about that range. So really, a lot of these lots are not that big. And so in this particular case, a 4,000 square foot lot can potentially have about 12 units within that lot itself, and can provide for that density. So,
and thank you for the information.
Sure.
I just think of, because in my neighborhood, it's like one house, everyone has the unspoken rule, you park in front of your own house, and then your kid gets a license, then now you got 3 cars, then your other kid gets a license, now you got 4 cars.
yes.
And so it's like, you start off with 12 cars, and then you get a kid, now you got 13, and someone else gets a kid. It's like, I know you guys are gonna come up with a great answer or solution.
I think, if I could interject here, I do think it's important that the council and members of the public understand that these types of units are very different from the single-family homes that are built in most of Hollister. And they're different in size and configuration, and honestly also the family types that they attract. So Hollister today has been building roughly 80% single-family homes, and I know so there's not as much experience with these apartments, but that's why Hollister really needs them. And they would almost certainly not be lived in by a family with 2 teenage kids who both get their driver's licenses. They would be small units that they might be lived in by those kids when the kids turn 18 or 20 or 22 and want to get out of their parents' house, and they need an affordable place to live by themselves as they establish themselves in the world. Maybe a couple would live there, but even, and maybe they would have an infant. But later, once that infant grows up, they would probably choose to move to a single-family home elsewhere in Hollister. But in the interim, what we're providing here is a unit type that's available for 1 individual or 2 individuals. Some may be older, they may not have cars because they're old enough that they don't actually drive much anymore. They may elect to not need a car because they walk around in downtown Hollister and can meet most of their needs then. And as Abraham said, they may park a car in a public parking structure a block or so away from their home. Those are very different lifestyle choices, I know, than many families would make living in single-family homes. But the point here is to provide additional housing options for people for whom the single-family home doesn't make sense and who want to stay in Hollister, but they need a small apartment and they don't need 3 parking spaces.
Yeah, thank you. That totally does make sense.
Yeah, and I would add, for the design for, say, the Hollister house, those designs are 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom apartments. So.
Okay, thank you.
Most of these would be newer buildings, and those buildings usually are designed with parking underneath. It's very important, and I think that's a well-planned building is going to accommodate their tenants, and usually they're limited to the number of spaces. Their homeowners association makes sure they're not parking around the neighborhood. And Mr. Early, this also helps us with our numbers to meet the state requirements, correct?
That's correct, and it's a twofold question. Number one is the absolute number of units that you can accommodate. That number overall has actually already been relatively good, but it is important to consider it. And then the other thing it does that this really addresses is that the state, no matter how high your total numbers are, the state presumes that you may not have true affordability if the units are built at less than 20 units per acre. So this is going to give you enough sites at 20 units per acre or more that you can show the state that you can presumptively supply affordable units because of their densities. And you couldn't do that in the past because you had an allowed minimum of 12 units per acre, even in your densest area. And that's not a number that the state presumes to be affordable.
Correct. So it helps us meet our numbers and reduces sprawl too. So
right.
Yes, and I just want to clarify that, you know what, I am 100% for high density. It's an area that we are lacking. One of the areas, and I'm glad that we're going to be addressing this.
Excellent. All right. But then if there's no other comments, we'll move to inclusionary housing as the last item.
Right, so and this is the last item, and it's the one, Councilmember Resendez, that comes up where you were talking about. We can go one more slide for the policy suggestions. So what this one says is, first off, that the GPAC has recommended a 20% of inclusionary requirement split among moderate, low, and very low incomes, with the details to be worked out through a future ordinance. We did make a note here that the state will likely review that requirement since it's above 15%, and that therefore you would also undertake a feasibility study to support it. Number two talks about not allowing alternative compliance methods for sale projects. The GPAC actually would have liked to have recommended that there be no alternative compliance for rental projects either, but the state law requires that an in lieu fee option be given for rental projects. And then finally is the item that Councilmember Resendez pointed out. The GPAC, at least as we understood it, recommended that any single family subdivision over 40 units would include at least 10% of those units as multifamily buildings of four, and we're defining multifamily as 4 units or more. And coincidentally, 10% of 40 is 4. So if you have a 40 unit subdivision, you can build one 4-unit building and qualify for under that rule, and you would go up from there.
Correct. This is the item I was pointing out. I think as we've seen in our community, we've seen single-family neighborhoods, many of them, and the issue we have here is making sure our own residents can afford a unit, and usually that's more of a multifamily type of a building. It's more affordable. And more often than not, that's probably going to be purchased by somebody here locally rather than commuting from the Bay Area down to buy a multifamily. They're here to buy the single families. I think this is a good way to create a better mix in our neighborhoods so our own residents can have the opportunity to buy these units. And I think I would like to see that number increase up to, at a minimum, 20, but I would say about 25%. To create more of a mixed neighborhood, so it's the single family homeowner gets to know the homeowner in the multifamily unit, and they're all equal, and that's how we should be building communities within our communities. That would be my recommendation. Councilmember Resendez.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I agree, and I'll definitely support that number, 25%. For the multifamily. It's something that our community is severely lacking, and we've been behind in for quite a while. So I'm glad to see that. I know it's something new for us, and it's probably a little bit unheard of, but it's something that's in dire need here. And then just so the other council members know, as far as the inclusionary housing number, I wanted a higher number, but the majority of the GPAC wanted to settle with 20%. So this was also a very lengthy discussion as well, a very robust discussion. So I definitely support what the GPAC came up with, which is 20% for inclusionary housing. Thank you.
Any other comments?
I could actually support 25 because it is a great need that we have, but that is a big number.
Yeah.
That's all I'd say. I'm kind of teetering on that one, but 20% I think is a lock for me. I would go 20.
Okay, Mr. Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. I too, as Councilmember Perez, can absolutely support the 20% without question. And I also like the idea that even though it's a different conversation, there's some consistency with the item number 1. So I think 20 would be a great opportunity. Let me ask this: if we find that 20 is underserving, how difficult is it to go back once the general plan is approved, adopted, and implemented to revise an item like that?
Takes a 4/5 vote.
I think the best thing to do with that, I appreciate the question, is to write it in such a way that we will say to develop an inclusionary housing ordinance with a target of approximately 20%, and with consideration for both the feasibility, which could actually lower the number, and with consideration for the need, which could raise the number. And then whatever ordinance you do come up with would be consistent with the general plan policy, and you could then go ahead and adopt it without a general plan amendment. So
I like that a lot. That makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you.
So I agree too, but if we say a target, does that mean that they can come in lower? I mean, well,
no,
it's
let
up to
me
us to
clarify.
approve
It would be a target for the program or ordinance, and the ordinance will be very specific and will not allow folks to come in lower.
Okay.
But there will
Awesome.
be wiggle room in this policy as to what program you develop. Once you have the program developed, it will be very specific.
Thank you. You've been very informative in this whole thing. It's been quite an experience.
It has been quite the journey. So I think I heard the council, they're good with number 1 to 20% for affordable.
Yes.
And I believe on number 3, is that where I heard 20% also?
Correct.
Was that your statement, Mr. Burns?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that would be fair, council. I think that is it, Mr. Early.
Yeah, let me say for the record, if we could just go on one more slide. I think we should have it on the record that the council has seen that there are 15 other items on here, the black items numbered 1 through 24. I know you've all had a chance to review those, and there was very good discussion by the GPAC about them, and you all, having reviewed them, are for now directing us to go ahead with the direction from the GPAC.
Yes, sir. Is that correct?
Correct.
We're in agreement, Shirley.
Great, thank you.
Mayor Velasquez, can I get clarity on that statement though? So when this comes back for final approval, we'll have an opportunity to have a more in-depth conversation on all 24 or 23 of the items. My specific concern is really, and I don't know that I'm prepared to have an in-depth conversation this evening, but about the economic development, and I'm really kind of concerned, and I thought the report was well written and very clear as it related to retail leakage and job creation. I think those are critical items as well, but as long as we can reserve the right to have an in-depth conversation about those at a later date.
Yeah, let me clarify that, because absolutely you have the right and even the duty to have every in-depth conversation you feel you need to have before you go and adopt this general plan. And that will be happening over the next several months and actually a full year. That said, and I know it's late now, perhaps you would want to talk about this at a subsequent council meeting and agendize it for another discussion. If any of you has looked at those policies that we've put before you to date, and you feel like they're incomplete or that you really want additional items added, we would appreciate hearing about that sooner rather than later. What we don't want to do is bring a fully complete general plan back to you and then have you all say, you know, this really is not nearly as comprehensive as we wanted, or it needs to have a different policy direction regarding economic development, and we need you to go back and do more. We're not ready to adopt it yet. I mean, we have a year now to get everything in order. So I would encourage you all to, it doesn't have to be tonight, but to go back and look at the documents. If you do feel like there are additional items you want to add, you could either talk about them as an informational item at a council meeting or put them in writing in a letter to staff and get an opinion as to whether they warrant, whether it's necessary from a process perspective that you talk about them in public at a council meeting, or if we could take one set of comments from one council member and use them to make some additional changes to our direction. But again, I want to try and make sure that that happens now-ish over the next, say, 3 to 5 months, and that it's not something that in a year you come back and say, really, we have to look at this in a whole new way, and then you've kind of squandered this time that we could have used right now.
Mayor Velasquez, I'm wondering if it wouldn't make sense to maybe schedule a follow-up meeting to this one, maybe in late August or even in September, to really take these items. I think this is very helpful as a layperson to better understand not only the process, but where we're headed as a community. And again, I like the idea of having the opportunity for public comment along the way. And I know that that happens during the meetings as well, but for me, I would like to maybe see this come back again to discuss the items that are in black font.
Absolutely. If you want to come back and have these discussions, we can bring them back. I would recommend, if you hadn't had a chance to do this yet, to go back and watch some of the videos on some of these discussions. Really help give you more information on what the thought process was and some of the input from the public, which would help us when we do meet for the items you'd like to bring back.
And if I could, maybe I can add also that I think all of these other 15 items, I'm trying to think of the right words to use there. They're more fundamental policy statements that I think are good planning sense, and they don't have as much of a potentially controversial edge to them. They are kind of good government approaches to doing the things that seem like they make sense in order to try and create additional jobs or enhance the tourism industry. So I don't think that there would be as much need to discuss them or get policy guidance about them. And that said, we of course would be happy to come and give the council a presentation about every one of these 15 items and how it's proceeding and why we think these are good approaches. But honestly, you may end that meeting say, well, of course I wanted you to do all these things. And I don't want to take your time going through them if that would be the nature of the discussion and if you don't want to do it. But if you do want to do it and you want to hear about what I think it's been, I want to say we crafted a lot of these, but the GPAC gave significant comment and added quite a number of things. So they really are a product of both our office, your staff, and your GPAC. And if you'd like to hear about them and just have a presentation so that council members and the public know all the things that are going to be moving forward, we're happy to do that.
I personally think that'd be very helpful, recognizing that Council Member Perez and myself are new to the council and we're not part of the formal process. Mm-hmm. And these are critical decisions that we're going to embark upon in the next year that are going to define how our city continues to grow and build out and, mm-hmm. and prosper. And so for me, I think that'd be very helpful.
I agree.
Mr. Burns, I agree with you. I think this is one of the most critical documents we put together as a community. It's something we pushed for years and years to try to get it to this point. The more conversation we have from this, the more input, the better the plan is. So, but I'd step back and say, please take a look at the videos for each of these meetings, get a lot of information, and then we can bring it back to have more conversations on the other items you're interested in.
Perhaps, Mayor, maybe even, I was going to say kick it down the road until sometime in November when we have a fifth council member, because they're going to come in all likelihood, behind the curve on this. But I also heard our presenters request that we don't, come back at the 23rd hour on this. So I don't know. I'm open to a time and a place to discuss the other 15 items that works mutually well. And so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, just to go back on that, I think it's, as they're pointing out, there's still a lot of work to do, but what is really important is we get this document done, because every day we lose, we're losing as a community. A lot of these things are, I think we can all say, well, yeah, we should have done that, but unfortunately, it wasn't being done. And until we can get into a document and agree on something, we're losing. And our schools are a very good sign of that. Unfortunately, they're paying the heaviest price, which means our community is paying a price for some of those mistakes. So I'm all for bringing it back, but I think, again, watch some of the videos, and then some of the items you have questions for, we can bring that back and go through them.
Yeah. And I would point out, and again, this would be through staff, but I think we can work with staff to determine the best timing for a briefing like that in public, and a public briefing is obviously very important. And that said, if one or two council members would like a briefing, obviously we wouldn't have a serial meeting or anything like that, but we could do a one-on-one briefing with a new council member to go over some of these items if that's appropriate. So there's a couple different ways to do that. Why don't we at PlaceWorks talk with your staff about it and try and figure out the right timing and the right approach?
I think that's a great recommendation also.
Thank you. I appreciate it as well.
All right. With
Hey,
that,
Tim, call me.
I will.
Mr. Early, I want to thank you, and I want to thank your staff for an incredible job that you did. I want to thank our all those on the GPAC, Mr. Huboy, Ms. Stevens, Mr. Resendez, Ms. Johnson, Mr. Evans, and Mr. Rebecki. When we started on this journey, and I will say it's a journey because it took us a long, long time to get here, a lot of controversy on this, but your company really did an outstanding job at bringing us together. Even those that had doubts about the fairness of this process quickly learned that we are one community trying to work together. And it's an amazing thing what happens when people take the time to just listen to each other and work together and build a plan that benefits the community. I really can't say thank you enough. I found this experience to be really something that probably one of the most rewarding experiences I've had being on this council. And I just, knowing that the difference we're gonna make for our community for the next 20 years plus by charting this path is something we can all be proud of. And I really, again, just want to thank you. Mr. Resendez, or anybody else want to say anything?
Sure. As the mayor pointed out, this is probably one of the most important things that I've done since being on the council, and it was a bit controversial, I'm not gonna lie, but I think that the old general plan, I mean, it was done, and it was done probably in the right way, but it was severely outdated, and it just didn't fit the needs of the community that we were elected to represent. And I think that some of the new council members can say that. We just came into office in a different time, and it's time for us to update. We're severely behind in our affordable housing, our multifamily. We're overloaded with single family homes, and that was the case then, but we're living in a different time. I'm so grateful to the GPAC, to our staff, to the consultants. I honestly think that everything that's come out of the GPAC is very representative of the interests and the needs and wants of the community that I heard when I was running for office. And I feel like I'm being not only on the council, but serving in the GPAC, I'm learning and I'm able to accomplish what the community and what the constituents would want. We're not gonna see these results overnight. It's gonna take time. We didn't get into the situation we're in overnight, but I have faith in our current council and our staff that we are gonna do what's asked of us, and we're gonna produce a beautiful community here. So again, I'm grateful to everybody that's worked on it, and I'm extremely humbled to be able to serve and to be a part of this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from the other Councilmember Perez?
This is very important. This is really important. I wanted to thank you again for you and the staff and all the committees, but it's been quite a ride. Our first meeting was a nice special meeting for emergency meeting for the masks, and leading up to today, it's like this has been quite a ride, and I can get off anytime now. No, I'm kidding. I'm not leaving. No, it's been quite a learning experience through this whole process, and it's a really honor to especially when we get I can't think of your name.
Mr. Early.
Mr. Early, yes. It's and you know when you have your staff working with our staff and it's just everything's working together. It not only makes this special, but it's such an honor to be up here to work with all these situations to make our city better for the future of our children. And so thank you, and that's it.
Thank you. Mr. Burns, did you have any comments?
Mayor, yes, some just brief final thoughts. First of all, thanks to all those that have participated. I know this is a monumental task, and I know we're not to the finish line, but we certainly got a good path to move towards the finish line. I also like the vision statement very much, but I also want to caution people that it's a vision, it's not a reality yet. And so I look forward to, once it's approved, taking whatever the next steps are to move forward to do all the things that the vision statement proposes to do. And I can't wait to see what an operational organizational plan will be to implement these different elements as we move forward. And so with that, I'd like to thank everybody for their involvement. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to make sure, Abraham, that I thank you personally and your staff, because really your staff with Placework staff, it was exciting to watch all of you be so excited. And I really mean that. I saw that with the staff from Placeworks and their knowledge, but watching our own staff be excited about a project and be so proud of it, I just can't say enough. But thank you.
Thank
Really,
you, Mr.
thank you
Mayor.
so much.
Thank you, Council. Could not do it without our wonderful staff, as you mentioned, Eva Kelly, Amber Cameron, Adeli Perez. Great to work with so far. And I am so happy that I was with high hopes that didn't expect anything less for tonight's meeting. I was very optimistic, and I think it's going on the right path. So thank you all so much for all of your hard work and dedication to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Early, do you have any comments before we move to adjourn?
I just want to echo what everyone has said and let you know how much we enjoy working with you, with the council, with the Planning Commission, the GPAC, and particularly with your staff. Abraham is leading a really exceptional team there, and they are a joy to work with, very responsive, and allow us to do our best work. And I want to also recognize Carrie Stone, who's been on the call and did speak a couple times this evening. She's done a great job as the project manager, and our other staff members at Placeworks have done an excellent job too. But really, I don't think any of this could happen without the leadership of the council, and I really appreciate all of the efforts that all of you are making to make this a reality.
Well, thank you, sir. With that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So
moved.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you, everyone, and good night. And thank you, community, for being
Good
involved.
night.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.